The man you trust most destroyed my family. Look beneath your own house. Adrian Moretti read the note 3 times before his hands started shaking. In 20 years of running one of the most dangerous crime families in New York, nothing had ever made Adrian Moretti's hands shake. Not a gun pointed at his head. Not a war with a rival family. Not the death of men he called brothers. But 7 words written in a dying woman's handwriting had done what no enemy ever could. If you've ever trusted someone who was secretly destroying you, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel. Drop your city in the comments and stay until the very end. The call came at 2:47 in the morning. Adrian was still awake. He rarely slept before 3, an old habit built from years of running an organization that never truly shut down. He was sitting in his private study on the 3rd floor of his Manhattan estate, reviewing financial documents with a glass of scotch untouched on the desk beside him, when his head of household security, a broad-shouldered man named Vincent Caruso, knocked twice and stepped inside without waiting. Vincent never entered without waiting. That alone told Adrian something was wrong. "Sir." Vincent's voice was flat, but his jaw was tight. "You need to come downstairs." Adrian set down the papers. He didn't ask questions. 20 years of reading men had taught him that the ones who kept their voices controlled were always the ones carrying the worst news. He followed Vincent out of the study down the curved staircase through the main corridor toward the east wing of the mansion, the domestic quarters where the household staff lived and worked. He smelled the blood before he saw it. Elena Rossi was lying on the marble floor of the service corridor, just outside the small storage room she used to keep cleaning supplies. She was curled on her side, one arm stretched in front of her. Her white uniform soaked through on the left side, where something had opened a deep wound beneath her ribs. Her breathing was shallow and fast, the kind of breathing Adrian had heard from men who were running out of time. "Who found her?" Adrian said. "Night Patrol. Luis. He was doing the east wing sweep at 2:30 and found the corridor door open." Vincent paused. "She'd been there a while, sir. Maybe an hour. Maybe more." Adrian crouched beside her. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck and felt a pulse, thin, unsteady, but there. "Why didn't anyone call an ambulance?" "Luis called me first." "I called you." Adrian looked up. His voice didn't rise. It never rose. "Call an ambulance, now, and get Dr. Ferrara on the phone. I want him at the hospital before she arrives." Vincent moved immediately. Adrian looked back at Elena. In the nearly 11 months she had worked inside his household, he had spoken to her perhaps a dozen times. She was not the kind of person who invited conversation. She arrived before anyone else was awake and completed her work quietly, efficiently, and without complaint. She was 34 years old, according to her employment file. She had no family listed, no emergency contacts. She had given her address as a small apartment in Queens and had passed the organization's standard background screening without a single flag. She was in every visible way exactly what she appeared to be, a quiet woman doing invisible work. He was about to stand when he noticed her hand. Her right hand, the one stretched forward on the marble, was not empty. Her fingers were curled loosely around a folded piece of paper, and even in the dim light of the corridor, Adrian could see she had gripped it deliberately, not dropped it, held it. He reached down and carefully worked the paper free from her fingers. She stirred when he touched her hand. Her eyes didn't fully open, but her lips moved. "Don't." Her voice was barely a breath. "Don't let him know." "Don't let who know?" Adrian said quietly. But her eyes had closed again. He unfolded the paper. 7 words in shaking handwriting. "The man you trust most destroyed my family. Look beneath your own house." Adrian rode with her to the hospital. It was not something he was expected to do. It was not something anyone anticipated. 3 of his men exchanged glances in the corridor when he climbed into the ambulance and he saw the confusion on their faces. Why would a man like Adrian Moretti accompany a maid to the emergency room at 3 in the morning? He didn't explain himself. He sat across from the paramedic working on Elena and watched her face while the city moved outside the windows. She was pale, the kind of pale that came from significant blood loss. The paramedic reported a deep laceration, possibly from a blade along her left side, clean-cut, deliberate angle. Not an accident, not a fall. Someone had done this to her, in his own house. Adrian turned that fact over in his mind the entire ride. His estate had cameras covering every entrance, every corridor, every perimeter point. It had a security team that rotated in 8-hour shifts. It had protocols built from 2 decades of operating in an environment where the wrong person walking through the wrong door could mean the difference between life and catastrophe. And someone had walked in, attacked a woman in the East Wing service corridor, and walked out without triggering a single alarm. That meant they knew the system. That meant they were either part of it, or they had help from someone who was. He held the folded note in his coat pocket and kept his hand over it the entire ride. Dr. Ferrara met them at the hospital entrance. He was a compact, careful man in his 60s who had served the Moretti organization for nearly 15 years, handling situations that couldn't be properly explained in official medical charts. He took Elena into surgery without asking Adrian any questions, which was exactly why Adrian trusted him. Adrian waited in a private room on the 4th floor that the hospital kept available for him. It was a small, clean room with 1 window and 2 chairs, and he sat in neither of them. He stood near the window and looked out at the city below the lights of Manhattan that never fully went dark, and he read the note again. "The man you trust most destroyed my family." He turned the sentence over carefully, the way a man examines a weapon he's never seen before, trying to understand both what it can do and who might have made it. The man you trust most. In Adrian's world, trust was not freely distributed. It was a scarce resource rationed carefully over years of loyalty and proven performance. He trusted perhaps 6 men with the full operational picture of his organization. Of those 6, he trusted 2 with his life. One was Vincent Caruso, his head of security, a man who had taken a bullet for Adrian during a territorial dispute in 2009 and had never once given him reason to doubt. The other was Marco Bellini, his second-in-command, his closest advisor. The man who had stood beside him through every significant moment of the last 18 years, every war, every negotiation, every loss, every victory. The man Adrian had personally pulled from a low-level position in his father's organization when he recognized something in him, a sharpness of mind, a calmness under pressure, and elevated him to the highest tier of the organization's structure. Marco, who was at this hour presumably asleep in his penthouse on the Upper West Side. Adrian looked at the note one more time and told himself he was not going to jump to conclusions. Then he put the note back in his pocket and called Vincent. "I need the full security footage from the East Wing for the last 6 hours," he said. "Don't share it with anyone. Bring it directly to me." A pause. "Anyone," Vincent said. "Anyone?" Adrian confirmed. "Including Marco." Done. The footage arrived on a tablet at 4:15 in the morning. Adrian watched it alone in the private hospital room with the door locked. The East Wing cameras covered 3 corridors and 2 exit points. He scrubbed through the timestamps methodically, beginning at 10 p.m. and working forward. The corridor outside Elena's service room was quiet for hours, staff retired before 11, and the night patrol rotation left predictable gaps of 12 to 15 minutes between sweeps. At 1:14 a.m., a figure appeared in the corridor. The person was wearing a dark coat with the collar turned up and a cap pulled low, which told Adrian they knew the camera positions. The angle caught only a partial frame. One shoulder, one arm, the edge of a jawline. Nothing definitive. But the person moved with precise familiarity through the corridor, stopped at the door to the service room, and went inside. At 1:22 a.m. they came back out and walked away without hurrying. 8 minutes. Whatever had happened to Elena had taken 8 minutes. Adrian paused the footage on the clearest frame he could find the partial image of the figure leaving the corridor, and he stared at it for a long time. The shoulder line, the posture, the particular way the person's weight shifted when they walked. He knew that walk. He had seen that walk across boardrooms and back rooms and restaurant tables for nearly 20 years. He sat back in the chair. His scotch was back on his desk at the mansion untouched. He had nothing to drink. He sat in the silence of the hospital room and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not anger. Not yet. Fear. Dr. Ferrara came out at 5:30 a.m. with clean hands and a careful expression. "She'll survive," he said. The wound was deep but missed the critical structures. She lost significant blood but received transfusion in time. He paused. She was lucky. Was she? Adrian said. Ferrara looked at him for a moment. Whoever did this knew where to cut to cause maximum damage without making it immediately fatal. It was precise work. Another pause. It was meant to be a warning, or an opportunity if she wasn't found in time. She nearly wasn't. Then she was lucky, Ferrara said again. She'll be unconscious for several more hours. When she wakes, she'll be in pain, but she'll be coherent. I'll be here, Adrian said. Ferrara studied him with the careful eyes of a man who had served dangerous people for a long time and knew better than to ask certain questions. I'll make sure she's in a private room. No visitors on the registry. Good. And Ferrara. Adrian looked at him directly. Nobody knows she's here. Not my men. Not my contacts. Nobody. Understood, Ferrara said quietly and left. Good. Adrian went back to the mansion at 6 a.m. He told his driver he needed to review some things at the house before the morning meeting and instructed Vincent to have the regular staff keep their normal routines. He didn't want anything to look different. He didn't want anyone to know he was paying attention. Because the first rule of investigating a betrayal was to let the person doing the betraying believe they were still invisible. At the mansion, he went directly to his private study, locked the door, and began going through what he actually knew about Elena Rossi. He had her employment file in front of him within 10 minutes. He read it the same way he would have read a contract, looking not for what was there, but for what should have been there and wasn't. Employment history. 2 years at a cleaning service in Brooklyn. 1 year at a private residence in New Jersey. 1 year at a hotel in Midtown Manhattan. All references verified at the time of hiring. All documentation clean. Education high school graduate, some community college coursework. Prior addresses 3 different Queens apartments over 7 years. Emergency contacts none listed, family none listed. Adrian read that line twice. None listed was not the same as none existing. People left family sections blank for many reasons: estrangement, privacy, complicated histories. But it was something you noticed particularly when combined with the note she had left him. The man you trust most destroyed my family. Not my father or my brother or my husband. My family. Whatever had happened, it had taken more than one person from her. He closed the file and picked up his phone. He called a man named Danny Chen, not a member of his organization, but a private investigator he had used for sensitive matters over the years. Someone with access to records that official channels didn't always provide, and the discipline to keep quiet about what he found. I need a full background pull on a woman named Elena Rossi, Adrian said without preamble. 34 years old, Queens address, cleaning service background. I need everything that's not in the surface file. Employment, family history, prior legal records, education, any financial irregularities. And I need it by end of day. That's a short window, Danny said. I know, double your rate. A pause. I'll have something for you by 4. Adrian hung up. He sat for a moment in the quiet of his study, the morning light coming through the eastern windows, and looked at the note again, where he had laid it flat on his desk. Look beneath your own house. He had assumed that was a metaphor. A reference to his organization, to the people inside his structure who he should be examining. Now, he was less certain. Marco Bellini arrived at the mansion at 8 a.m. for their standing weekly briefing. which was what he always did on Monday mornings, and Adrian was waiting for him in the dining room, with coffee and a newspaper open on the table, which was also what he always did. Nothing different. Nothing to indicate that anything had changed. Marco was 52 years old, silver-haired, and possessed of the particular ease that came from decades of operating at the top of a powerful organization. He wore it in the way he walked into rooms, not arrogantly, but with the settled confidence of a man who knew his position was secure. He had a quality that Adrian had always valued in him. He never appeared nervous. He did not appear nervous this morning. "You look tired," Marco said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. "Late night. One of the staff had a medical issue," Adrian said, turning a page of the newspaper without looking up. "Nothing serious. Had to deal with some paperwork." "Which staff?" "One of the housekeeping girls. She's fine." Adrian finally looked up and held Marco's gaze with exactly the expression he had worn at 100 meetings across the table from men who were lying to him, open, mildly interested, untroubled. "How was your weekend?" "Quiet." Marco poured himself coffee. "Finished that review of the Castellano account. I think we need to restructure the arrangement. There are some irregularities in the reporting that I want to walk you through." "Sure," Adrian said. "Let's get to it." For the next 90 minutes, they discussed organizational business. Adrian listened, responded, made decisions, and watched Marco the entire time with the particular quality of attention he had developed over 20 years, not staring, never staring, but cataloging. The small things. The micro-expressions. The moments when a man's eyes moved in a direction that didn't match what his mouth was saying. Marco's performance was excellent, which Adrian reflected it always had been. That was the thing about a man who was very good at deception. He didn't give you obvious tells. He gave you nothing at all because nothing was the safest thing to give. But Adrian had spent 20 years learning to find something in nothing. And at one point during the meeting, a brief, barely there moment when Adrian mentioned casually that he'd been thinking about upgrading the East Wing security cameras, he saw it. Marco's left hand, which had been resting on the table, moved, just slightly. The fingers tightened for 1 second, then relaxed. It was nothing. It was everything. Danny Chen called at 3:47 in the afternoon, with a voice that carried the particular flatness of a man who had found something he hadn't expected to find. "You're Elena Rossi," he said. "Surface file is clean because someone built it clean. It's a professional construction good enough to pass standard screening, which is why your people didn't flag it. But when you go deeper, the timeline starts to fall apart. The references exist, but the actual employment history doesn't track. She worked at the Queen's cleaning service for 6 months, not 2 years. What's her real history? That took me longer to get to." A pause. "Her real name is Elena Conti. She changed it legally 8 years ago through a court filing in New Jersey. Before that, she was Elena Conti, daughter of a man named Joseph Conti. Joseph Conti was an accountant who worked for several businesses in the New York financial district in the early 2000s, including a consulting firm that, if you look hard enough at the corporate structure, connects back to some of your older family holding companies." Adrian's hand tightened on the phone. "What happened to Joseph Conti?" he said. Danny's pause this time was longer. "He disappeared in 2004. Police report lists him as a missing person. Case was never closed. His wife, Elena's mother, died 18 months after he disappeared. Officially heart failure. Elena would have been 12 at the time. She went into the foster system for 4 years before aging out." Another pause. "But here's the part that probably matters to you most. Tell me." "I found a record of a legal representation inquiry from 5 years ago. Elena Conti, using her birth name, contacted a civil attorney asking about statutes of limitations on wrongful death cases. She provided documentation to the attorney. I couldn't get the full content of those documents, but the attorney's file notation described them as financial records and internal correspondence from a corporate entity. Did she pursue the case? The attorney declined to take it. His notes say the documentation was compelling, but the targets were, and I'm quoting directly, beyond the practical reach of civil litigation given their current profile and resources. Adrian stood up from his desk. "Danny," he said, "I need to know one more thing. The consulting firm that connects to my family's holding companies, who was the primary contact person on that account?" He already knew the answer, but he needed to hear someone else say it. "A man named Marco Bellini," Danny said. "He was listed as the managing director of the consulting entity. He oversaw all the accounts that Joseph Conti worked on." Adrian arrived back at the hospital at 5 p.m. He told no one where he was going. He found Elena awake in her private room, pale, careful in her breathing, an IV in her left arm, but awake. Her eyes tracked him when he came through the door, and he saw what he had not expected to see in them. Not surprise, not fear, relief, which told him something important. She had hoped it would be him who found the note. She had gambled lying on that marble floor with 8 minutes of damage done to her that Adrian would be the one to pick up the paper, that he would be the one who came. He pulled a chair to her bedside and sat down. "Elena Conti," he said quietly. She didn't flinch. "You're faster than I expected. I had good help." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands folded. "I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning." She looked at him for a long moment, reading him the way he realized she had probably been reading him since the day she walked into his household. Assessing. Calculating whether the risk of honesty was smaller or larger than the risk of silence. "My father worked for a firm called Meridian Consulting," she said. Her voice was rough from whatever anesthetic they'd used, but her diction was clear. "He was their senior accountant. He was meticulous. That was the word people always used for him. Meticulous. He never made errors, and he never ignored them. And he found one, not an error." She shifted slightly against the pillow, and the movement cost her something. She went still and breathed through it before continuing. "He found something much larger. He found a system, a parallel accounting structure embedded inside the firm's legitimate operations. Someone was using the firm's financial channels to move money, large sums, irregular intervals, always routed through intermediary accounts that dissolved within 60 days of the transfer." "How much money?" "Over the period, my father reconstructed approximately $48 million over 4 years. That was only what he could document from his access. He believed the actual total was significantly higher." Adrian said nothing. He let her continue. He didn't understand at first what the money was connected to. He thought it was tax evasion, maybe fraud. He started quietly making copies of the records. He brought them home. He told my mother he was building a file that when it was complete, he was going to take it to the authorities. She paused. He never finished the file. Because someone found out he was building it. 3 weeks before he disappeared, he told my mother he thought someone at the firm had realized what he was doing. He was scared. She wanted him to stop, to walk away, to just leave the job. He said he couldn't, that what he'd found went beyond tax fraud, that people had been hurt. Her eyes stayed on Adrian's face. 2 days after that conversation, he didn't come home from work. "And you were 12. I was 12. Her voice stayed flat, factual, the way people speak about catastrophic things when they've rehearsed the telling enough times that the words have worn smooth. "My mother fell apart. I don't blame her. She was 40 years old with a missing husband and no income, and a daughter she didn't know how to protect from what she knew. She died 14 months later. The official cause was cardiac arrhythmia." Elena stopped. She was 41 years old, and she had never had a heart problem in her life. Adrian was quiet for a moment. "You believe she was helped to die?" "I believe she was frightened to death," Elena said. "I believe someone made very clear to her what happened to people who knew too much, and her body gave out under the weight of that fear. Whether it was natural or accelerated, I can't prove it either way. But I know what my mother was like before my father disappeared and what she became after. Those were 2 different people. And after she died, you went into foster care. 4 years. Then I aged out." She exhaled slowly. "I spent the next 12 years trying to find out what happened to my father. I worked, I saved. I put myself through 2 years of accounting courses because I needed to understand what he had found. And eventually, I found a lawyer who told me the documentation I'd inherited from my mother, the partial records my father had copied and hidden in the house, pointed directly at a man named Marco Bellini, the lawyer who declined to take the case. She looked at him. "You found that already. I told you I had good help." The lawyer said Bellini was too connected, too protected, that the records alone weren't enough, that I'd need something more, something that couldn't be challenged or dismissed. She met his eyes steadily. "So I decided to get it. By getting inside my house. I spent 8 months getting myself positioned as a credible candidate for your household staff. I learned everything I could about your domestic operation, your security rotation, your staff structure. I knew that if the records my father described existed anywhere, they would be inside this house. Marco Bellini wouldn't keep something like that outside his own reach, and your house was the only place he had access to that wasn't directly traceable to him." Adrian sat back. He thought about 11 months of Elena Rossi moving through his household, cleaning, organizing, maintaining the invisible infrastructure of his daily life, and simultaneously, underneath that surface, conducting an investigation with a patience and discipline that he would have considered remarkable in any of his own operatives. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he said. "Yes," Elena said. 3 weeks ago. There's a room beneath the east wing of your mansion, behind the original foundation wall, behind the storage room where I kept my supplies. Someone built it decades ago and concealed the entrance inside the wall panel. I found it by accident. I was moving heavy shelving, and I noticed the wall gave slightly in a place it shouldn't. The storage room. The same room the attacker had pulled her from. "What's in it?" Adrian asked. "More than I expected," Elena said. "I documented what I found, but I couldn't remove it too much volume, and I wasn't certain who I could trust to help me. I was building toward a moment where I had enough additional evidence to go to the authorities with something that couldn't be buried. And then, last night, someone found out. I don't know how." For the first time, something shifted in her face, not fear exactly, but the acknowledgement of it. "I was careful. I was always careful. He's careful too," Adrian said. "Marco has been careful for longer than you've been alive." He looked at her for a moment in the hospital room's flat light. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "I have nothing left to be dishonest about," she said. "When you came into my house, when you chose to come in, chose me specifically, what did you believe about me?" Elena held his gaze for a long moment before answering. "I believed you were complicit," she said. "I believed you had to know at some level what Marco was doing. I came in ready to expose you both. And now?" She thought about it. "The more time I spent inside your world," she said slowly, "the more I began to wonder. The way your operation actually functions, the way you handle things, the way your people talk about you when they think no one important is listening, it didn't match a man who knew. It matched a man who was being used. There's a difference," Adrian said, "between not knowing and choosing not to look." "Yes," Elena said, "there is." She looked at him steadily. "Which were you?" The question landed in the silence of the room and sat there. Adrian didn't answer it immediately. He thought about 20 years of decisions he had made inside an organization built on his father's legacy and the things he had allowed himself to not examine too closely, because examining them would have required him to dismantle something he had spent his entire adult life building. "I don't know," he said finally. "I think I have to find out." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "The room beneath the east wing. In the back left corner behind the shelving unit, there's a false panel. Inside the panel, there's a metal case. The combination is 6241. She paused. "My father's birthday. I found the combination with the copies he left my mother. He must have hidden the case himself." Adrian stood. "I'm going to post a man outside this room," he said. "Someone I trust completely. You stay here. You don't let anyone in who doesn't come directly from me." "And what are you going to do?" He picked up his coat from the chair. "I'm going to look beneath my own house." he said. Q. He drove himself back to the mansion. No driver, no escort. He needed the privacy of the car to think, and he needed to arrive without announcement. The East Wing storage room was exactly as Elena had described it. He moved the heavy steel shelving unit himself. It was heavier than he expected, and in the moving of it, he felt the particular quality of the resistance, the slight difference in the floor beneath the front legs, that told him this had been moved before and returned to precisely the same position every time. He found the panel in the wall where Elena had described it. He pressed both palms flat against it, and it gave inward not a door exactly, more like a section of the original foundation structure that had been modified and disguised. Behind it was a staircase, narrow and steep, leading down into a space beneath the East Wing's foundation. He went down. The space below was larger than he expected, perhaps 20 feet by 15, with low concrete ceilings, and walls lined on 3 sides with heavy metal shelving. On the shelving were boxes, perhaps 30 of them, each labeled in a neat alphanumeric system. In the back left corner was the shelving unit Elena had described, and behind the second false panel he found the metal case. He stood in the cold underground room and turned the combination. 6, 2, 4, 1. The case opened. Inside was a single envelope and a small recording device, the kind used for dictation, outdated now, the format of something recorded 2 decades ago. The envelope contained a handwritten letter, 3 pages, in a careful accountant's hand. Adrian, if you are hearing this, it means you finally discovered the truth. He read the letter standing up in the cold in the room beneath his own house, and when he finished reading it, he stood very still for a long time. Because Joseph Conti, meticulous, careful, already frightened, already certain he was running out of time, had not only documented the financial crimes. He had documented everything. Every name, every transfer, every order given and received, every person eliminated, and the chain of authorization that led back to the man who had made the call. And at the bottom of the 3rd page, in slightly shakier writing, as if the hand that wrote it knew it was the last thing it would ever write, you were never the monster I feared. You were the shield someone used to hide their crimes. I am sorry it took my death to show you. I hope if you find this that you are the kind of man who will do something with what you find. Adrian folded the letter. He put it back in the case. He picked up the recording device, and in the cold and silence of the room his empire had been built over, he pressed play. The recording was 41 minutes long. Adrian stood in the cold room beneath his own mansion and listened to every second of it. Joseph Conti's voice was calm in the way that people become calm when they have already accepted the worst possible outcome and are simply trying to be useful in the time they have left. He spoke without dramatics, without self-pity, with the precise and methodical diction of a man who had spent his entire professional life making sure numbers told the truth. He stated dates, account numbers, transfer amounts, names of shell companies, and the names of the men behind them with the same steady cadence as if he were delivering a financial report to a board of directors rather than a confession into a recorder in what he clearly believed were the final days of his life. And somewhere in the middle of the recording, around the 20-minute mark, when Joseph Conti began detailing the specific mechanism by which the money moved from the holding companies through the Meridian consulting accounts and into a series of offshore structures, Adrian heard his own name. Not as a perpetrator, as a cover. The Moretti family name was used as the visible face of 3 of the holding entities. My understanding, based on the internal correspondence I reviewed, is that Adrian Moretti himself had no direct knowledge of how these entities were being used. The authorization signatures on the relevant documents were not his. They belonged to a man named Marco Bellini, who held power of attorney over these structures through a legal instrument that Adrian Moretti almost certainly signed without understanding what it authorized. Bellini was extremely careful to ensure that Moretti's name provided the legitimacy, while Moretti himself remained insulated from the operational details. Adrian pressed pause. He stood in the silence of the underground room. Power of attorney. He remembered signing it, a document Marco had brought to him 12 years ago, framed as a routine administrative measure to allow Marco to handle certain financial transactions on Adrian's behalf when Adrian was traveling or unavailable. Adrian had signed it in 30 seconds, which was exactly what Marco had counted on. He pressed play again. What I cannot say with certainty is whether Adrian Moretti's ignorance was genuine or willful. I believe it was genuine. The way the structures were designed, the information was deliberately compartmentalized, so that even a careful man would not see the full picture without looking in exactly the right places. I spent 4 months looking before I understood what I was seeing. But I want to be honest, I cannot know what is in another man's heart. I can only say what the documents tell me. Adrian turned off the recorder. He sat down on the cold floor of the underground room, something he could not have imagined doing 24 hours ago. A man like him sitting on a concrete floor in the dark, and he put his head back against the shelving unit and closed his eyes. He thought about 12 years. 12 years of Marco sitting across from him at tables, riding beside him in cars, standing next to him at the funerals of men who had served the organization and died in its service. 12 years of trusting that the information Marco brought to him was accurate, that the reports were truthful, that the decisions he was making were based on reality rather than a carefully constructed fiction. 12 years of being the face on a building he hadn't designed and didn't own. He opened his eyes. He had 2 choices. The first was the choice that would have been obvious to the man he was 6 hours ago contained this. Take the evidence, assess the threat, neutralize it quietly, and rebuild control of the situation before anyone outside the mansion's walls understood what had happened. Protect the organization. Protect the name. The second was the choice Elena had asked him, without asking whether he was capable of making. He stood up, picked up the metal case, and walked back up the stairs. He called Vincent at 7:30 p.m. from inside the East Wing storage room, with the door locked and the panel resealed behind him. I need you to come to the East Wing, alone. Don't log the movement and don't tell anyone where you're going. Vincent arrived in 4 minutes. When he came through the door and saw the metal case in Adrian's hands and the expression on Adrian's face, he didn't say anything. He just closed the door behind him and waited. How long have you known about the room below this floor? Adrian asked. Vincent's face didn't change. What room? Adrian looked at him for 3 full seconds. He was looking for the thing he'd seen in Marco's face at the table that morning, the micro-tension, the brief controlled moment of recalibration. He saw nothing in Vincent's face except genuine confusion. There's an underground room beneath this wing, Adrian said. Someone built it into the original foundation, concealed entrance through that panel. He tilted his head toward the wall. I've just spent the last hour in it. Vincent turned to look at the wall, then back to Adrian. I had no idea. I believe you, Adrian said, because he did. Because Vincent's confusion was the wrong shape to be performance. It was disorganized, fractured the confusion of a man genuinely encountering something that had no place in his existing understanding of the building he was responsible for securing. Sit down. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything. Vincent sat on a crate of cleaning supplies. Adrian told him everything, from the moment he found Elena on the floor to the recording and the letter. He told it linearly, without editorializing the way he would present a situation report. Facts in sequence. He watched Vincent's face move through a series of controlled responses, the particular shifting landscape of a loyal man receiving information that required him to quietly restructure everything he thought he knew. When Adrian finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Vincent said, Marco. Marco, Adrian confirmed. For how long? The documentation goes back at least 18 years, possibly longer. The earlier records may be in those boxes downstairs, but I haven't had time to go through all of it. Vincent was quiet again. He was not a man who spoke before he had decided what to say. What do you want to do? He said finally. I want you to help me understand the full scope of what's in that room, Adrian said. And I want you to do it without anyone else knowing. Not the men. Not Marco. A pause. I'm particularly concerned about Marco's movements in the next 24 hours. He knows Elena survived. He'll want to know why she hasn't been found dead, and why I haven't mentioned it. You think he'll make another move? I think he's been making moves for 18 years, and I've been too close to see them, which means I'm probably still too close. Adrian looked at him. I need someone who can watch from the right distance. Vincent nodded slowly. I can set up a quiet monitor on Marco's communications, his calls, his meetings, discreet enough that he won't notice I have the infrastructure for it from the previous security review. Do it. And Vincent? Adrian stopped. No one touches Elena again. I don't care what it takes. She is the only fully independent witness to any of this. Without her, everything in that room is just paper, and Marco will know that. Understood. Vincent stood, then he paused at the door. Adrian, 20 years I've worked beside you. I want you to know I have never not once had a reason to doubt that what you told me was true. Everything you told me to do, everything you said you'd ordered, I believed it came from you. I know, Adrian said, which means some of what I've done. Vincent stopped. His jaw tightened. I need to think about that. So do I, Adrian said. So do I. He didn't sleep. He spent the night at his desk going through the boxes from the underground room that Vincent quietly moved up to the study, working through the material with the same methodical focus he would have given to any organizational problem cataloging, sequencing, cross-referencing. Except that this time, what the material was revealing was the architecture of his own deception. The boxes contained 23 years of documentation. Financial records, internal memoranda copies of correspondence photographs, and in 3 separate sealed envelopes, handwritten lists of names. The names were organized into categories that were not labeled, but whose meaning became clear within the context of the surrounding documents. The first category was men who had known and been paid. The second was men who had known and been removed. The third was men who had never known, who had served the organization with full belief in its stated purposes, and paid for that belief in ways they hadn't understood. Adrian found his own name mentioned 47 times across the documentation. In every single instance, it appeared as a cover signature, a nominal authority, or a stated justification for a decision that had actually been made by Marco Bellini. In every single instance, he had been, and the precision of Joseph Conti's word came back to him now with the full weight of its meaning, a shield. A name. A face with enough real power and real reputation that no one had thought to look past it at the smaller, more careful man operating in his shadow. He poured himself the scotch he had left untouched the night before and drank it in one movement. Then he put the glass down and kept working. At 11 p.m., his phone rang. Marco. Adrian looked at the name on the screen for 2 rings. He picked up. You're up late, Marco said. His voice was easy warm, the voice Adrian had heard thousands of times, the voice he had trusted to tell him the truth about the world. Couldn't sleep, Adrian said. Old habits. I hear you. I've been restless myself. A pause that was almost perfectly casual. How's the staff situation? The girl who had the medical issue, everything sorted. The question landed in Adrian's chest like a cold hand. She's fine, Adrian said. Appendix. They say she'll be back on her feet in a week. Good. Another pause. Just a beat too long. Which one was it? I don't think I caught the name. Maria. Adrian said, choosing the name of a woman who didn't exist in his household staff. Quiet girl. You wouldn't know her. Right, Marco said. Right. Well, good that it wasn't serious. Listen, I had a thought about the Meridian account after our meeting today. Can we add 30 minutes to tomorrow's schedule? I want to walk through the restructuring proposal with you properly. Of course, Adrian said. Morning works. Perfect. Sleep well, Adrian. You too, Marco. He hung up. He sat for a moment in the silence of his study. Marco was confirming she was still alive. He was trying to identify her without asking directly. He had asked which staff member used an illness, rather than the real cause to create a gap in the story, and waited for Adrian to fill it with either confirmation or misdirection. And Marco, Adrian knew, would now be assessing the name he'd been given. He would be thinking about whether Maria matched the profile of the woman he had attacked last night, He would be running the logic forward, which meant the window was closing. Adrian picked up his phone and called Danny Chen again. "I need you to find out if Marco Bellini has any connection to a man named Luis Ferraro," he said. Luis was the night patrol guard who had discovered Elena. Background, employment history, any financial connection between them. Danny said nothing for a moment. "You think the discovery wasn't accidental? I think everything in the last 24 hours was too clean to be accidental," Adrian said. "Someone attacks Elena at a precise time. The patrol guard finds her at a precise time. Elena is kept alive, but barely. I find the note. Everything points me in exactly one direction." He paused. "Either Marco is trying to clean up a loose end, and it went wrong, or someone is helping Elena by making me find her. Those are very different scenarios." "I know." Adrian rubbed the back of his neck. "Find me the connection, if there is one." Danny called back at 1:15 a.m. "Luis Ferraro," he said, "was hired to your security team 14 months ago. His background check was processed through Marco Bellini's office, not your main HR operation. The referral documentation is signed by Bellini." Adrian felt the cold settle across his shoulders. "But here's where it gets interesting," Danny continued. "Luis Ferraro has a sister. Her name is Rosa Ferraro. She was married for 6 years to a man named James Conti." Adrian closed his eyes. "James Conti," he said. "Elena's brother. Cousin, actually. First cousin on the father's side. James Conti died in 2016 car accident ruled accidental, but the circumstances were the kind that would make a careful person ask questions." A pause. "Luis Ferraro attended Joseph Conti's memorial service in 2005. He would have been 19. He knew Elena Conti as a child." "He's not Marco's man," Adrian said slowly. "He's Elena's." "It looks that way. I think he got himself positioned inside your security team specifically to serve as her safety net. If something happened to her, he was the one who would find her. And he made sure to be the one patrolling the East Wing last night. The rotation logs would tell you whether he arranged the assignment or whether it was coincidence, but given everything else—" "Nothing is coincidence," Adrian said. "I know." He sat with this for a moment. Elena Conti had not come into his household alone. She had built an infrastructure, a quiet, patient, remarkably sophisticated operation, and she had placed a human safeguard inside his own security team. She had accounted for the possibility that she might be found before she was ready. She had planned for the possibility of her own attack. She had planned for almost everything. And she had still ended up on the floor of that corridor, because Marco Bellini had been careful for longer than either of them. He went to the hospital at 7 a.m. Elena was more alert than the evening before, sitting up slightly. Her color improved, though the shadows under her eyes were deep. Luis was standing outside the door. Adrian had called him directly and confirmed his position, and the conversation had been brief and honest on both sides. "You knew her before," Adrian had said. "Yes," Luis said. "Since she was a child. Her father was... He was a good man, Mr. Moretti. He didn't deserve what happened to him." "No," Adrian said. "He didn't. Stay on the door. Nobody comes through it." Inside the room, he pulled the chair close to Elena's bed and set the metal case on the floor between them. "I went through the boxes," he said. "All of them. I spent the night with them." She watched his face carefully. "And your father was right about everything," Adrian said. "Every dollar, every name, every transaction, it's all there. 23 years of documentation. Some of it I didn't know existed. Some of it I signed my name to without knowing what I was signing." He paused. "And some of it—" He stopped. "What?" she said. "Some of it involves operations that I thought I had ordered, decisions I believed I was making." He looked at her steadily. "I've spent the last several hours understanding that I was making decisions based on information Marco controlled. He managed what I saw and what I didn't see. He framed the choices I was given. In some cases, he attributed decisions to me that I never made. He let that land. I don't say this to excuse myself. I'm saying it because you deserve to understand the complete picture. Elena was quiet for a moment. How many people were hurt by those decisions? She said. I don't have a full count yet, Adrian said. But based on what I've reviewed, more than I want to say out loud right now. My father was one of them. Yes. The word sat between them. I'm sorry, Adrian said. Elena looked at him for a long time. He could see her working through something, not whether to believe him exactly, but something more complicated than that. The question of what to do with a truth that didn't arrive in the shape you'd expected it to. Marco called you last night, she said. It wasn't a question. At 11. He was trying to confirm you were alive and identify you without asking directly. What did you tell him? I gave him a fake name and a false medical reason. It buys us maybe 24 hours before he decides the story doesn't hold and looks harder. 24 hours, Elena said. Her voice was flat, measuring. That's not a lot of time. No. Adrian agreed. It isn't. He leaned forward. I need to ask you something, and I need your honest assessment. The documentation in those boxes, is it enough for a prosecutor? For a case that can't be dismissed or buried? Elena thought about it. Not quickly, she thought about it the way her father would have. He suspected with the careful, analytical patience of someone who had spent years inside the material. The financial records alone would be compelling, she said finally. The recording is significant. It's a contemporaneous account from a direct witness. The photographs and correspondence establish intent and knowledge. She paused. The problem is authentication. All of it has been sitting in an underground room for 20 years. Defense attorneys will challenge the chain of custody, argue fabrication, argue that it was planted, unless we have an independent witness who can authenticate the documentation. Yes. Someone who handled the original documents, who can testify that they are genuine. Yes. She looked at him. Where are you going with this? Marco was not the only person who knew, Adrian said. He was the primary architect. But this kind of operation at this scale for this long doesn't operate with one person. There were people who processed the accounts, moved the money, maintained the shell structures. Some of them may still be operating, and at least one of them. He paused. At least one of them might understand that if Marco is willing to put a blade in a woman to protect himself, he's equally willing to clean up every other loose end he has. Elena was very still. You want to turn one of them? She said. I want to give someone who is currently at risk the opportunity to make a better decision. Do you know who? Adrian opened the metal case and removed the third sealed envelope, the one with the list of names, the category that his internal shorthand had labeled men who had known and been paid. He had spent part of the night assessing those names against what he knew of their current circumstances and their personal temperaments. One name had stayed with him, a man named Gerald Watts, he said. He was a mid-level financial officer at Meridian Consulting in the early 2000s. He's 63 now, retired, living in Connecticut. Based on the documentation, he processed a significant number of the transfers. He would have known what he was moving, even if he didn't know where it ultimately came from. He received substantial payments for his cooperation. He paused. His wife died of cancer 2 years ago. He has 2 adult daughters, and based on the most recent payment records in those files, Marco stopped paying him approximately 4 years ago, which means he's no longer protected, Elena said slowly. Which means he may be looking at his past and wondering exactly how exposed he is, Adrian said, and wondering what Marco might do if the situation became unstable. Elena looked at him for a moment. Then she said something he hadn't expected. You're good at this. He wasn't sure whether it was a compliment or an observation or something in between. I've spent 20 years running an organization, he said. I'm good at reading people and understanding what they want. I just wasn't looking in the right direction. You're looking now. Yes, he said. I am. At 9 a.m. Danny Chen sent a message with Gerald Watts's current address and phone number in Connecticut, along with a brief note. He called a criminal defense attorney twice in the last 6 months, both times for a consultation, not a retainer. He's thinking about it, but hasn't committed. Adrian read the message and forwarded it to Vincent with one line, "I need a meeting with Watts today. Arrange it without using the organization's channels." Vincent replied 20 minutes later. "Done. He'll meet at a diner in Westport at noon." He sounded scared. "Good," Adrian typed back. Scared men make honest decisions. He left for Connecticut alone. Bond. Gerald Watts was already at the diner when Adrian arrived, a heavy-set man in a gray sweater, with the look of someone who had been waiting anxiously for long enough that anxious had cycled back around to exhausted. He was drinking coffee with both hands around the cup, and when Adrian slid into the seat across from him, Watts looked up with the expression of a man who had hoped right up until this moment that the meeting might somehow not be happening. "Mr. Moretti," he said. "Gerald." Adrian settled into the booth without drama. He ordered coffee from the passing server with a brief gesture and said nothing else until the server had moved away. Then he looked at Watts directly. "I know what you did. I know how long you did it, and approximately how much you were paid to do it. I'm not here to threaten you." Watts's hands tightened on his cup. "Then what are you here for?" "I'm here because I believe you understand that the situation you're in has recently become significantly more dangerous than it was a year ago," Adrian said. "And I'm here to tell you that the option you've been thinking about, the attorney consultations, is the right instinct. You should talk to an attorney. You should talk to a federal prosecutor." Watts stared at him. "You're telling me to go to the feds?" "I'm telling you that the person who is actually responsible for what happened at Meridian Consulting is a man named Marco Bellini, and that Marco Bellini has recently done something that tells me he is beginning to eliminate the people who know what he did." Adrian kept his voice level. "I want to give you the opportunity to be on the right side of what happens next. Not because I'm a generous man, because you are one of the few people alive who can authenticate the documentation that will be necessary to make the case against him stick." Watts was quiet for a long moment. His jaw worked. His eyes went to the window, then back to Adrian. "He'll know," he said. "If I go, he'll know." "Not if we move correctly," Adrian said. "And not if you move first." He paused. "Gerald, he stopped paying you 4 years ago. He doesn't need you anymore. Which means you're not an asset to protect, you're a liability he hasn't gotten to yet." Watts put his coffee down. His hands weren't steady. "What would I have to do?" he said. "Talk to a federal prosecutor. Authenticate the documents. Testify to what you directly witnessed." Adrian looked at him steadily. "Tell the truth." The word truth landed on Gerald Watts like a stone dropped in still water. Adrian watched the ripples cross his face, the fear, the fatigue, the calculation, and beneath all of it, something that might have been relief at the possibility that there was finally a way through. "I need immunity," Watts said. "That's between you and your attorney and the federal prosecutor," Adrian said. "But I think you'll find them receptive given the scope of what you can provide." Watts nodded slowly. Once then again, as if he were convincing himself. "The money," he said quietly. "The money I took, I spent most of it. My wife's treatment. The girls' educations. I don't have most of it." "That's also between you and the prosecutor," Adrian said. "But I want you to understand something clearly, Gerald." He waited until Watts was looking at him. "I'm not doing this to protect myself. I'm doing this because a woman nearly died in my house last night to expose what Marco Bellini has been doing for 20 years. And I'm not willing to let that cost her everything and mean nothing." Watts looked at him for a long moment. "They say you're a dangerous man," he said. "I am," Adrian said simply. "But dangerous in a direction that right now is pointed at Marco Bellini." Watts picked up his coffee again. His hands were slightly steadier. "I'll call my attorney today," he said. "Good." Adrian stood and laid a card on the table, not a business card, just a handwritten number. That's a secure line. When you've spoken with your attorney and you're ready to move, call it. He left Watts sitting in the diner with his coffee and the particular expression of a man who had just committed to something terrifying and necessary in the same moment. He was 40 minutes outside the city when Vincent called. "Adrian." The flatness in Vincent's voice was the same quality he'd had when he knocked on the study door 24 hours ago. "We have a problem. Tell me." "Marco made 3 calls this morning that I tracked through the monitor. 2 were routine, I've already verified them. The 3rd was to a man named Reyes. You don't know him. He's contract independent, no organization affiliation. He's been used twice before for sensitive cleanup work." Adrian's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "He's hiring someone to finish the job on Elena," he said. "More than that." A pause. The call wasn't about Elena. Reyes was given 2 names. "What names?" "Elena Conti," Vincent said. "And yours?" The car was quiet, except for the sound of the engine and the road. Adrian drove for 3 seconds without speaking. "He knows," Adrian said. "He knows something. Maybe not the full scope yet, but enough. The conversation at the meeting, the call last night, something in the way you've been moving today, he's read it." Vincent's voice stayed controlled, which took effort that Adrian could hear. "He's not trying to contain the situation anymore. He's eliminating it." "Both of us," Adrian said. "He can't afford a living witness, and he can't afford you going in a direction he doesn't control," Vincent said. "If you're gone, the organization restructures under him, and the documentation in that room stays buried permanently." Adrian processed this quickly and completely, the way he had processed threats for 20 years. Not with emotion, but with the cold clarity of someone who understood that speed of decision mattered more than comfort of decision. "Get Elena moved," he said. "Different hospital, different name, different room. I want her relocated within the hour, and use Luis Ferraro to coordinate it, not anyone from the organization's regular team." "Already on it. What about you?" "I'm coming back," Adrian said. "But not to the mansion." "Where?" "I need to make a call first." He paused. "Vincent, this might not end the way I've managed things in the past. I need you to be clear on that. If this goes where I think it's going, I've been clear since this morning," Vincent said simply. "Whatever direction you go, I go with you." Adrian looked at the road ahead of him. "Call you in 20 minutes, he said, and hung up. He drove for 3 miles in silence before he made the second call. The number he dialed had been in his phone for 4 years, unused except for one brief exploratory conversation that had gone nowhere. A federal organized crime investigator named Cates, whom Adrian had met at a charity event, and who had, with the careful indirection of a professional, made clear that if Adrian ever found himself at a crossroads, there was a conversation available. The phone rang twice. "This is Cates," said the voice on the other end. "This is Adrian Moretti," Adrian said. "You told me once that if I ever wanted to have a conversation, the offer stood." A pause. The careful, controlled pause of a man who had been waiting for this call for 4 years and was not going to allow himself to react prematurely. "The offer stands," Cates said. "I have documentation covering 23 years of criminal activity connected to my organization," Adrian said. "I have a witness who can authenticate that documentation. I have a second witness in Connecticut who is prepared to speak with a federal prosecutor. And I have evidence of an ongoing attempt by the primary perpetrator to eliminate everyone involved." He paused. "I am not going to negotiate my own freedom. I'm going to give you everything and let the process determine what it determines. But I need one thing in exchange." "What's that?" Cates said. "The woman who gathered this evidence and nearly died doing it, I need your guarantee that she will be protected from the moment you and I finish this conversation." Another pause. Longer this time. "Where are you right now?" Cates said. 40 minutes from Manhattan," Adrian said. "There's a federal building on Church Street," Cates said. "How soon can you be there?" Adrian looked at the road. 40 minutes, he said. The federal building on Church Street had a side entrance that most people never noticed, a plain door off a narrow service alley that led directly to a bank of elevators and bypass the public lobby entirely. Cates met Adrian there himself, which told Adrian something important. This was not being routed through the normal channels. Cates was handling it personally, which meant he understood the stakes well enough to know that normal channels were exactly the kind of thing Marco Bellini had spent 20 years learning to navigate. Cates was a lean man in his mid-50s, with the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades listening more than speaking. He shook Adrian's hand without ceremony, and led him upstairs to a conference room where two other people were already waiting. A younger woman introduced as Assistant U.S. Attorney Diane Park, and a second investigator whose name Adrian didn't catch and didn't ask for again. Adrian set the metal case on the table. "Before we begin," he said, "I need confirmation that Elena Conti is being moved to a secure location and that the protective arrangement is in place." Cates looked at Park. Park nodded once and stepped out of the room with her phone. "She'll be secured within the hour," Cates said. "You have my word." "Your word is noted," Adrian said. "Now let me show you what 23 years looks like when someone finally decides to open the box." He opened the case. What followed was 4 hours that Adrian would later describe to no one because there were no words adequate to the particular experience of sitting in a federal building and methodically dismantling the empire you had spent your entire adult life constructing. He walked Park and Cates through the documentation in the sequence he had organized the night before, financial records first establishing the mechanism. Correspondence. Second, establishing knowledge and intent. The photographs. Third, establishing the human cost. And finally, the recording which he played from beginning to end while the room was completely silent. When Joseph Conti's voice finished and the recording clicked off, Diane Park sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "How long has this been in that room?" she said. "Based on the documentation, the earliest materials date to approximately 2001, Adrian said. "Someone, I believe Joseph Conti himself, built the concealed space into the foundation and began storing copies there as insurance." "He hid it inside your house," Cates said. Not accusatory, analytical. "Inside the house he believed was being used to cover what Bellini was doing," Adrian said. "I think he understood that if anything happened to him, hiding evidence in the most visible place connected to the operation was the last thing anyone would look for. Nobody searches the inside of the thing they're trying to protect." Cates was quiet for a moment. "Smart man." "He was," Adrian said. "His daughter is smarter." Park looked up from the documents. "Elena Conti. She's the one who found this. She spent 11 months inside my household, gathering enough context to locate and access the room. She was attacked last night before she could move the documentation to a secure location." Adrian kept his voice level. "The attack was authorized by Marco Bellini. I have the call intercept that connects him to the individual he contracted for the work." He slid Vincent's transcript of the monitored call across the table. Park read it. Her expression didn't change, but her pen moved quickly across her notepad. "You recorded your own second-in-command's communications," Cates said. "I established a monitor on his calls after I found Elena last night and read her note," Adrian said. "The intercept was made within my own organizational infrastructure. Marco used a phone registered to a business entity he controls. We'll need the technical details on the intercept method," Park said. "For evidentiary purposes. Vincent Caruso, my head of security, can provide everything you need. He's prepared to cooperate fully." A pause. "There's also a second witness, a man named Gerald Watts in Westport, Connecticut. He was a financial officer at Meridian Consulting in the early 2000s. He processed a significant portion of the transfers. He called a criminal defense attorney this morning, and I expect he'll be in contact with your office by end of day." Park and Cates exchanged a look. "You've been busy since 2 in the morning, Cates said. "I had a lot of information arrive in a short window," Adrian said. "I work quickly when the situation requires it." Park leaned forward. "Mr. Moretti, I want to be direct with you. The documentation here is significant. The recording is remarkable. With Watts's authentication and Elena Conti's testimony, this is a prosecutable case, a strong one." She paused. But you understand that your own exposure in this material is not zero. I know. The signatures, the power of attorney, the entities that operated under your name. I know, Adrian said again. I told you when I called Kate's that I'm not negotiating my own freedom. I'm giving you everything, and I'm trusting the process to distinguish between a man who built a criminal organization and a man who was used as the face of crimes he didn't authorize. He looked at her directly. I don't know with certainty which one I am. I know the evidence supports the second version, but I also know that I spent 20 years choosing not to look at things that might have told me the truth sooner. And that choice has a cost. The room was quiet. That's an unusual statement from someone in your position, Park said finally. I've had an unusual 24 hours, Adrian said. He left the federal building at 4:30 p.m. He did not go back to the mansion. The mansion was no longer safe, not because of any external threat, but because the mansion was Marco's territory as much as it was his, and he was no longer willing to operate inside a space that Marco understood better than he did. He had Vincent send a clean car to a side street 2 blocks from the federal building and drove himself to a midtown hotel, a small anonymous place that had no connection to his name or his organization. He took a room on the 7th floor under a false name and sat on the edge of the bed for 10 minutes without moving. 20 years of his life was in a federal building downtown, being photographed and cataloged and built into a case file. The organization he had inherited from his father and spent 2 decades expanding and protecting was about to come apart in a way that could not be stopped or reversed. The men who worked for him, many of whom were loyal, many of whom had served him well, many of whom had lives and families built around the structure he provided, were going to find themselves in a world where that structure was gone. He thought about all of that. Then he picked up his phone and called Vincent. "Status," he said. "Elena has been moved," Vincent said. "She's in a secure medical facility in New Jersey under federal protective custody. Kate's people handled the transfer personally. Luis Ferraro is with her as a personal request from her. They've cleared it." A pause. "She asked about you." "What did she ask?" "Whether you'd actually gone to the feds, or whether you'd decided to handle it the other way." Vincent paused again. "I told her you'd gone. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, 'Good.'" Adrian absorbed that. "What's Marco doing?" he said. "That's what I was about to call you about." Vincent's voice tightened. "He showed up at the mansion 2 hours ago. He told the staff he was there to cover the afternoon meeting while you were out. He went directly to your study." Adrian stood up. "He was looking for the case," he said. "He spent 40 minutes in the study, then he went to the East Wing." A beat. "He found the storage room, he found the panel." "And the room was empty." "And the room was empty," Vincent confirmed. "He stood down there for a while. I had a camera positioned on the staircase since this morning. Then he came back up. He called someone from his personal phone, not Reyes, a different number I haven't identified yet. The call lasted 6 minutes. "What was his face like?" Adrian said. "When he came up from the room." "That's the thing," Vincent said. "He looked calm. He didn't look panicked or angry. He looked like a man who had just confirmed a calculation he'd already made." Adrian thought about that. A panicked man made mistakes. A man who confirmed a calculation moved to the next step in his plan. "He knew the room would be empty," Adrian said. "He didn't go there hoping to find the documentation. He went to confirm it was gone." "Which means he already knows you've moved." "Which means he's been ahead of us longer than I thought." Adrian started pacing 3 steps to the window, 3 steps back. "He's not trying to recover the situation anymore. He's already decided the situation is lost. He's in damage control." "What does that look like for Marco?" "It looks like making sure that every person who can testify against him becomes unavailable before a case is formally opened," Adrian said. "Watts, Elena, me. Gerald Watts needs to move now. Call Danny Chen and tell him to contact Watts directly and get him to the federal building tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight." "Done. What about you?" "I'm in a hotel. I'm not going to tell you which one because I don't want that information in your phone. Adrian stopped pacing. Vincent, I need to ask you something I should have asked 2 years ago. Ask. The men in the organization who reported to Marco directly sans de Mateo Reyes on the contract side, how many of them knew? Not suspected. Knew. A pause. Sans knew, Vincent said. I've believed that for a while. Di Matteo, I'm less certain. He followed orders without asking questions, which could mean he knew, or could mean he was just that kind of man. Another pause. Reyes is contract. He knew what he was hired to do, not why. Sans, Adrian said. How close is he to Marco right now? Physically, he was at the mansion when Marco arrived. They spoke privately for about 20 minutes before Marco left. Vincent's voice went careful. Adrian, if Marco is in damage control, Sans is a loose end too. I know, Adrian said. Can you get to Sans before Marco decides Sans is a problem? Maybe. If I move fast? Move fast, Adrian said. And Vincent, be careful. Marco is good at this. So am I, Vincent said, and hung up. Maid. The call from Diane Park came at 6:15 p.m. We have a problem, she said, and the particular flatness in her voice was the same quality Vincent carried when delivering bad news. The call intercept you provided Marco Bellini's communication with Reyes. Our technical team has reviewed it. And the recording is clean, the content is clear, but Bellini's attorney, and Bellini apparently has had his attorney on standby since this afternoon, which tells you something about his timing. His attorney is already arguing that the intercept method is inadmissible. He's claiming unauthorized surveillance, Fourth Amendment grounds, fruit of the poisonous tree on anything derived from it. Adrian closed his eyes for 1 second. Can he make that argument stick? He can make the argument. Whether it sticks depends on how we build the rest of the case, and whether the documentation stands independently. Park's voice stayed controlled. The good news is that the documentation does stand independently. The financial records, the correspondence, the recording your maid's father left, none of that was obtained through the intercept. It will survive the challenge. But Bellini's attorney is already signaling that they intend to fight every piece of this on procedural grounds. Which means the case takes time, Adrian said. Yes, potentially significant time. A pause. And we have a more immediate problem. We got a flag from our surveillance on Marco Bellini's vehicle he left Manhattan 40 minutes ago. We're tracking the car, but he has sophisticated counter-surveillance training, and his vehicle dropped out of the GPS network approximately 20 minutes ago. He's going to Elena, Adrian said immediately. We don't know that. He knows I've moved. He knows the room is empty. He's done the calculation that I've either contacted you or I'm about to. His only remaining lever is Elena, because Elena is the human authentication for everything in those boxes. Adrian was already moving, pulling his jacket from the chair. He's going to New Jersey. Our protective detail is in place at the facility. Marco spent 20 years building relationships inside systems like yours, Adrian said. I need to know right now how secure is the detail you have on her. How deep do those assignments go? Because if Marco has even one contact inside your organizational structure, who owes him? A silence that lasted 2 seconds too long. I'm calling the detail now, Park said, and her voice had changed. I'm going there, Adrian said. Mr. Moretti. I'm going there, he said again, and hung up. He called Vincent from the elevator. Where are you? He said the moment Vincent picked up. Still at the mansion. I found Sans. He's agreed to talk, but he's scared and he wants a lawyer present before he says anything on record. That's fine. That's good. Leave someone with Sans. I need your location in New Jersey, the facility where Elena is. I don't have the exact address. The transfer was handled by Cates's people, and they kept it compartmentalized. Get it from Luis Ferraro. Call him now and tell him I'm coming and to not open that door for anyone until I get there. On it. A beat. Adrian, how did this move so fast? Because Marco has been thinking about this scenario for 20 years, Adrian said. He built his exit plan before he needed it. I built mine in the last 12 hours. He got to the lobby and walked directly to the side exit. "Go faster than him. That's all we can do." Luis Ferraro answered his phone on the first ring. "It's Moretti," Adrian said. "Where are you?" "Outside her door," Luis said. His voice was tight. "There are 2 federal agents at the end of the corridor. They've been there since the transfer. Has anyone approached the room in the last hour?" One of the nurses came by at 5 to check her vitals. Before that, one of the federal agents came down the corridor around 4:30, said he was doing a check of the exit stairwell. A pause. "I didn't think anything of it at the time." "Which agent?" "The same one who's there now." A longer pause. "No," Luis said slowly. "Different one. The one who came by at 4:30 isn't one of the 2 who are there now." Adrian stopped walking. "Luis, don't open that door for anyone. Not nurses, not agents, not building staff. Nobody until I say so. Can you lock it from the inside? The patient room has an interior privacy lock. Use it, right now while I'm on the phone." He heard movement, a door, the sound of a lock engaging. "Done," Luis said. "Stay on the line," Adrian said, and immediately dialed Kate's on his second phone. It rang 4 times before Kate's picked up. "The agent who checked the exit stairwell outside Elena's room at 4:30 p.m., Adrian said without preamble. "Who authorized that check and what was his name?" "A beat." "Hold on." Kate's voice went muffled. He was talking to someone in the room with him. Then it came back sharper. "I'm running the shift log now." 30 seconds of silence that felt like 10 minutes. "There's no authorized check logged at 4:30, Kate said. "The only logged corridor movements are the nurse's vitals check at 5 and the regular end-of-corridor sweep at 6. "Someone was outside her door at 4:30 posing as a federal agent," Adrian said. "And they were scoping the room layout. Marco is moving tonight." Kate's was already issuing instructions to someone on his end. Adrian could hear the rapid back and forth. Then Kate's came back. "I'm sending additional people to the facility now. ETA 20 minutes. "I'll be there in 15, Adrian said. "How?" "I'm already in New Jersey." He wasn't. He was still 12 minutes from the facility. But he drove those 12 minutes the way he had driven through crises for 20 years, with absolute focus, without the particular kind of fear that clouds decision-making, the cold part of his mind running every scenario, while the rest of him handled the physical mechanics of getting where he needed to be. He thought about Marco. Marco, who had built this entire structure with such patience and precision. Marco, who had been in every observable way a loyal and capable second. Marco, who had sat across tables from him for 18 years with calm, silver-haired composure and told him what he needed to hear while engineering everything Adrian never saw. Adrian thought about the recording in the metal case. Joseph Conti's voice steady and careful, explaining the mechanism of his own death. He thought about a 12-year-old girl going into foster care. He drove faster. He arrived at the facility at 7:08 p.m. He was out of the car before it fully stopped and through the main entrance with the particular movement of a man who had spent 20 years walking into rooms that didn't want him there and doing it anyway. The reception staff started to rise from behind their desk, and he had his phone out, showing a text from Kate's with his name on it before they could speak. And then he was through the interior door and moving down the corridor toward the elevator. He took the stairs. 3rd floor, East Wing. He came through the stairwell door and stopped. The corridor was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not the wrong that announced itself immediately. The subtle wrong, the particular stillness of a space where something had shifted from where it should be. The 2 federal agents who should have been at the far end of the corridor were not in their positions. One of them was 30 feet closer to Elena's room than the protocol position, which meant either he'd moved forward in response to a sound, or, and this was the reading that landed in Adrian's chest. Like a cold weight, he wasn't the same person who had been in position when Luis last checked. The agent saw Adrian enter the stairwell door and turned. Their eyes met across the corridor for 1 second. Adrian had looked at enough men in enough dangerous moments to know. He moved. He didn't run. Running announces the decision before you arrive. He walked fast and with absolute purpose, and the man who was not a federal agent made the mistake that men under pressure always make. He reacted to the threat in front of him before completing the objective, which meant he turned away from Elena's door toward Adrian, and in that pivot he lost the geometric advantage he'd had. He had 4 inches of height on Adrian and possibly 20 pounds. None of that mattered in the close quarters of a hospital corridor, where the relevant calculation was not physical but tactical. And Adrian had spent 20 years in rooms where the tactical calculation was the only one that counted. The man reached. Adrian stepped inside the reach, and 2 seconds later, the man was against the wall with his arm locked at an angle. It was not meant to achieve the particular quiet of controlled pain, keeping him from making a sound that would have brought the situation into a different register entirely. "Where is Marco Bellini right now?" Adrian said very quietly directly into the man's ear. A sharp exhale of breath. "I don't—" Wrong answer. Try again. Another exhale. Tighter this time. "Parking structure. Level 2. He was supposed to wait for my signal." What was the signal? Text, 1 word. What word? A pause that cost something. Done. Adrian held the position for another 3 seconds. Then he released the arm, took the man's phone, and his weapon stepped back and said, "Sit down on the floor and don't move." The man sat down. Adrian knocked twice on Elena's door. "It's Moretti. Open up." A beat. Then Luis's voice from inside, code word. Adrian almost smiled despite everything. Elena had planned for this too. She would have given Luis a code word to verify identity. "I don't have a code word," Adrian said. "But the man who was outside your door is currently sitting on the floor 12 feet to your left, and he's going to need medical attention for his shoulder in about an hour." A pause. Then the sound of the lock. Luis opened the door. He took in Adrian's face, and the man on the floor, and the weapon in Adrian's hand, and his own expression, moved through about 4 emotions in 2 seconds before settling on something that was mostly relief. "She's okay," Luis said immediately. "She's okay." Adrian stepped inside. Elena was sitting up in the bed, not the semi-reclining rest position of earlier, but fully upright. Her jaw set, the IV still in her arm, but her entire posture, that of a person who had decided that whatever happened next was not going to happen to her lying down. "Marco," she said. "Parking structure downstairs," Adrian said. "Waiting for a signal that isn't coming." She let out a breath. "Is he still there? I need to make sure his exit routes are covered before he realizes his man hasn't reported in." He was already dialing Vincent. "When Cates's people arrive 60 seconds, maybe less, I need you to stay in this room and stay with Luis. Do you understand?" "I understand." She looked at him, the same direct assessing look she'd had since the first time she was awake enough to look at him. "Be careful." "I have his man's phone," Adrian said, "and his weapon, and I know where he's waiting." He moved toward the door. "Stay here." He had the door half open when she said his name. Not Mr. Moretti. Not in the way she'd said it before. Just Adrian. He stopped. "He's not going to accept this quietly," she said. 20 years of building something, men like that don't surrender it. They destroy it before they let someone else take it. "I know," Adrian said. "So you have to be the one who decides what it's worth to you," she said. "Not just what it's worth to expose him. What it's worth to you personally. Because he's going to make it about that." Adrian looked at her for 1 moment. "He already has," he said, and walked out. Cates's additional team arrived 43 seconds later. Adrian was at the stairwell door when they came off the elevator, 4 people in tactical vests moving fast and quiet. He identified himself, pointed to the man sitting on the corridor floor, and gave them the situation in 8 seconds. "Parking structure level 2, he said. "1 subject, Marco Bellini. He's been waiting for a signal from the man on the floor that hasn't come. He's armed, he's calm, and he will not come quietly." The team leader, a woman who didn't waste time on anything that wasn't operationally necessary, nodded once. "We go now. You stay here." "I'm going with you," Adrian said. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. "Stay behind the team and don't engage unless I give instruction." "Understood," Adrian said. They moved. The parking structure attached to the medical facility had 3 levels and a rooftop deck. Level 2 was the most common parking floor, covered with adequate exit routes to both street level and the level below. Marco had chosen it the way Marco always chose things, not randomly, but after calculation. 2 exits meant 2 options. The support column density meant coverage from line of sight. A silver sedan, not his regular car, Adrian noted, was parked in a corner bay, with clear sight lines to both elevator banks. Marco was standing beside the driver's door with his phone in his hand when the team came off the access stairwell. He saw them immediately. And the first thing Adrian noticed, the thing that told him Elena had been exactly right, was that Marco did not look like a man who had been caught. He looked like a man who had been confirmed. He had known this was coming. Not this specific moment, not this exact configuration of people and circumstance, but the general shape of it, the shape of an ending. He had built it into his calculations years ago. He looked past the team to Adrian, and he smiled. Not warm. Not the smile Adrian had seen across 1,000 meeting tables. This was the smile of something that had finally stopped pretending. "Adrian," he said. His voice was the same as it had always been. Easy, settled. "I wondered if you'd be here yourself, or if you'd let them handle it." "Put the phone down, Marco," the team leader said. Marco looked at her briefly, and then back to Adrian. He wasn't moving toward the car, wasn't moving away. He was standing very still in the way that dangerous men stand still, not in submission, but in assessment. "How much did you tell them?" Marco said to Adrian. "Everything," Adrian said. "Everything." Marco repeated the word as if testing its weight. "And the room, the documentation." "Also everything." A pause. Something crossed Marco's face, not panic, not fear. Closer to the expression of a chess player who has just seen the endgame 5 moves out and is deciding whether to play them or tip the board. "It won't be enough," Marco said. "You know that. You know how these things work. Evidence goes into a legal system, attorneys get involved, procedures get challenged. Men like us have seen it 100 times. Men like you," Adrian said, "not me." Marco's expression shifted. "You think there's a difference. You think the way this story gets told in a courtroom makes you something other than what you are." He spread his hand slightly, the gesture of a reasonable man making a reasonable point. "You signed the documents, Adrian. You received the benefits. You asked the questions you wanted to ask and didn't ask the questions you didn't want to answer. 20 years of that, and you think showing up at a federal building with a box of paper changes the category you're in." "Maybe it doesn't," Adrian said. "Maybe I end up in the same category. But the people you put in the ground don't get a category anymore. Joseph Conti doesn't get a category." Something moved in Marco's face at the name. Not guilt. Marco was too far past guilt for that. But recognition. The particular stillness of a man hearing a name he had decided 20 years ago was finished and finding it unexpectedly present. Conti was a problem, Marco said. He was going to destabilize something that was supporting 100 people's livelihoods. Sometimes one problem has to be resolved for the larger structure to hold. He had a 12-year-old daughter, Adrian said. "Everyone has someone," Marco said simply. The parking structure was very quiet. The team had spread to cover Marco's exit angles, and Marco knew it and wasn't moving. He was still watching Adrian with that settled assessing quality. "You came here yourself," Marco said. "Why, you already gave them everything. You could have called from wherever you were hiding and let them handle it. But you came." "Because she asked me to be careful," Adrian said. "And I wanted to make sure the situation didn't require anything outside the team's capability." She. Marco looked at him with something that might have been genuine curiosity. "A maid," he said. 20 years of building with me, and a maid unmade it. "A woman whose father you murdered," Adrian said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Marco said. "You've been in this world long enough to know that..." Marco. Adrian's voice didn't rise. It got quieter, which was the thing that had always in 20 years stopped a conversation. "Put the phone down. This is done." Marco looked at him for a long moment. In that moment, in the quality of the silence between them, Adrian saw something he hadn't expected. Beneath the composure, beneath the calculation, beneath 18 years of perfect performance, he saw the particular exhaustion of a man who had been holding a very heavy thing for a very long time, and had just in this moment felt the weight of it land fully. It didn't make Marco sympathetic. It made him human, which was in some ways worse, because it meant all of this had been chosen. Not compelled, not inevitable. Chosen every day for 20 years. Marco set the phone on the roof of the car. He turned and placed his hands flat on the vehicle's surface. "Adrian," he said quietly without turning around. The team was moving toward him. "For what it's worth, the organization was real. What we built together was real. I want you to know I didn't—" He stopped. "What?" Adrian said. Marco was quiet for a moment. "I didn't enjoy what I did to get here," he said. "I want you to know that." Adrian looked at the back of Marco's silver-haired head while the team moved in. "I don't believe you," Adrian said, "but I don't think it matters anymore." They cuffed Marco Bellini in a parking structure in New Jersey at 7:41 p.m. on a Tuesday, and he didn't say another word. Adrian walked back to the elevator alone. He rode it to the 3rd floor. He walked down the corridor past the position where Marco's man had been sitting. He was gone now, taken by a separate team, and knocked twice on Elena's door. Luis opened it. Adrian stepped inside. Elena looked at him from the bed and read his face the way she had learned to read it quickly, accurately, without needing to be told. "It's done," she said. "It's done," he said. She let out a breath that was long and slow, the kind of breath that carries years in it. Her hands, which had been gripping the edge of the blanket, released. "He didn't fight," she said. "Not the way I expected him to." Adrian pulled the chair to the bedside and sat down. He felt the tiredness of the last 40 hours settle into him, not weakness exactly, but weight. The particular weight of a situation that had required every available resource and had now finally stopped requiring them. He argued. Then he put his hands on the car. Elena was quiet for a moment. "My father's recording," she said. "Did they hear it?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "He would have wanted that," she said. "He recorded it because he needed someone to hear it. He needed someone to understand." She looked at her hands. "He didn't get to know if anyone ever did." "He knew you would," Adrian said. "He hid it where you could find it." She looked up. "He hid it in your house," she said. "He hid it where he believed the truth should eventually live." Adrian thought about that. About a meticulous accountant hiding evidence in the last place anyone would look. About a 12-year-old girl growing up without parents and spending 20 years building toward this moment. About 41 minutes of a careful man's voice on a recording saying, "I hope if you find this, that you are the kind of man who will do something with what you find." "The case is going to be long," Adrian said. "Marco's attorney is already challenging the intercepts. There will be hearings, appeals, delays. It's not going to be clean or fast." "I know," Elena said. "I've been waiting 20 years. I can wait longer." "You'll need to testify," he said. "Multiple times. It will be—" "I know what it will be," she said. "I planned for it." She looked at him. "What about you? What does it look like for you?" "I don't know yet," Adrian said honestly. "Diane Park was straightforward with me. The exposure isn't zero. The signatures, the entities, the decisions I made without asking the questions I should have asked. Some of that is going to cost me." "Are you prepared for that?" He thought about the question. "I spent the drive out here thinking about what it means to be prepared for something you can't fully predict," he said. "And I decided the only useful answer is to do what I should have done years ago and let the process determine what it determines." He looked at her. "I'm not afraid of accountability. I'm afraid of what it means that it took this long to choose it. Elena looked at him for a long moment, with the steady reading quality that he had come to understand was simply how she looked at everything. Not judgment exactly, but honest assessment. My father wrote in his letter that you were a shield, she said. That you were used. But he also wrote that he hoped if you found it, you were the kind of man who would do something. I remember, Adrian said. He didn't say you were innocent, she said carefully. He said you weren't the monster he feared. There's space between those things. Yes, Adrian said. There is. I think, Elena said slowly, that the space between those things is where you actually live, and where you go from here is what determines which direction you move inside it. The hospital room was quiet around them. Somewhere down the corridor, a phone rang twice and stopped. The ventilation system moved the air in the particular colorless way of institutional spaces, and outside the window, New Jersey spread out in its unremarkable nighttime geography, and none of it looked like the setting for the end of 20 years of something. But it was. And in the morning, it would look like the beginning of something else. Adrian didn't know yet what that was, but for the first time in 20 years, he was choosing the direction himself. The morning after Marco Bellini's arrest, Adrian Moretti woke up in a midtown hotel room with nothing. Not literally nothing. He had his phone, his wallet, the clothes he'd been wearing for 36 hours, and approximately 9 minutes of sleep, accumulated in fragments across a chair he'd sat down in at 2 a.m. and hadn't intended to stay in. But the nothing he woke up with was the other kind, the kind that lives in the chest cavity where certainty used to be. 20 years of knowing exactly who he was and what he was building, and now the building was gone, and the identity that came with it was standing in the rubble, deciding what it was without the structure around it. He showered. He ordered coffee. He sat on the edge of the bed and called Vincent. Status, he said. Marco is in federal custody. Processed last night. Park moved fast once they had him. His attorney filed 3 motions before midnight. Vincent paused. Sands talked. He was with his attorney from 9 p.m. until 2 in the morning. He gave them 6 years of operational detail names of 3 additional individuals inside the financial structure and confirmed the authorization chain on 4 specific incidents that are now going to be central to the prosecution. Another pause. DiMatteo disappeared. Define disappeared. His apartment was empty when 2 of Cates's people went by at midnight. His car is gone. His phone has been off since approximately 7 p.m. last night. Vincent's voice was flat and careful. He either ran on his own, or he was helped to run before someone could ask him the wrong questions. Adrian processed that. DiMatteo running meant he knew enough to be scared. DiMatteo being helped to run meant someone in Marco's remaining network was still operational enough to move people. Both scenarios were problems, but they were problems for Cates and Park to manage. That was the thing about transferring a situation to the proper authorities. You stopped being the one who had to solve every piece of it. That was also the thing that was hardest to get used to after 20 years of being the person every piece came back to. Let Cates know about DiMatteo, Adrian said. I'll call Park this morning and give her everything I have on his known contacts and likely routes. Already sent them the file this morning, Vincent said. I figured you'd want it handled quickly. Good. A pause. How are the men? Vincent was quiet for a moment. Confused, he said finally. Scared. Some of them are angry at you specifically. There's a faction that thinks you burned the organization to save yourself, and they're not wrong to ask the question, even if they're wrong about the answer. He paused again. A few of them are asking about you personally, asking if you're okay. Which ones? Vincent gave 3 names. 2 of them surprised Adrian. 1 of them didn't. Tell the ones who are asking that I'm fine, and that I'll speak to everyone when the legal situation allows, Adrian said. Tell the ones who are angry that their anger is legitimate, and I'm not going to argue with it. He thought for a moment. And Vincent, the men who are genuinely clean, who served without knowing what was operating underneath them, I want to make sure they're not left in a position where the collapse of the organization takes their livelihoods with it. Can you make a list? That's going to be the complicated list to build, Vincent said. I know. Start it anyway. He hung up and sat for another minute with the coffee getting cold in his hand. Then he called Diane Park. Hi. Park answered on the second ring with the crisp efficiency of someone who had been awake since before he called and had already accomplished several things. Marco's attorney filed a bail hearing request for this afternoon, she said. I'm going to oppose it. Given the evidence of ongoing attempts to silence witnesses the judge will likely deny, but I want you to know it's happening. What else? Adrian said. Gerald Watts came in last night. His attorney negotiated through the night he'll receive a cooperation agreement in exchange for full testimony. He authenticated 14 of the financial documents from the metal case and identified 2 additional accounts that weren't in the existing documentation. A beat. Your maid's father was even more thorough than the files showed. Watts said Conti had flagged irregularities that even Watts himself hadn't fully understood at the time. Joseph Conti was meticulous, Adrian said. His daughter told me that was the word people always used for him. It's an accurate word, Park said. Now I need to speak with you about your own situation. The U.S. Attorney's Office has reviewed the documentation and the cooperation you've provided. There are 3 categories of exposure for you personally. I want to walk through them. Go ahead, Adrian said. Category 1. Actions directly traceable to your authorization that constitute criminal activity under federal statute. Based on the documentation, this category is smaller than we initially anticipated. The power of attorney mechanism was effective most of the criminal authorizations route through that instrument rather than your direct signature. A pause. That's the good news. Category 2, Adrian said. Actions traceable to your authorization that constitute criminal activity and where the documentation is ambiguous about whether the power of attorney was the operative instrument or whether you independently authorized them. This category is larger. Park's voice stayed professionally neutral. Your attorneys will need to address this category. I'd be misleading you if I told you it disappears. And Category 3. Actions where you were the nominal authority, but where the evidence strongly supports that you were operating without full knowledge of what you were authorizing. Based on Watts's testimony and the Conti recording, this is a significant portion of the overall activity. She paused. The recording specifically exculpates you in a way that will matter in court. But it doesn't eliminate the other categories, Adrian said. No. Park said. It doesn't. Adrian set down the coffee cup. I told you when I came in that I wasn't negotiating my freedom. That's still true. I want to cooperate fully on every category. I will provide everything I have, testify to everything I know, and I will not allow my attorneys to construct a defense that contradicts what the evidence actually shows. A pause from Park's end. That's an unusual position, she said. I've been told that before, Adrian said. It doesn't change it. I need you to understand something clearly, Park said. And her voice shifted slightly. Still professional, but with the particular quality of someone who was saying something they considered important rather than procedural. The kind of cooperation you're offering at the level you're offering it, the full-scope voluntary without negotiated limits, this affects the outcome, not eliminate. Affect. I want to make sure you're going in with realistic expectations. I have realistic expectations, Adrian said. I just don't think they're the point. Another pause, longer this time. All right, Park said. Then I'll be in touch about the formal cooperation interview. This week, if possible. Anytime, Adrian said. I'll be available. He hung up. He looked at the cold coffee, then he picked it up and drank it anyway. He went to see Elena at noon. She had been moved to a different room, brighter with a window that faced east, and the federal protective detail outside the door had been increased to 3 people since the previous night. Luis Ferraro was still there, a fact that Adrian had quietly made sure of by calling Cates directly. Elena looked better than she had any right to look, given what her body had been through in the last 48 hours. Her color was improving. The careful quality in her eyes had shifted from the watchful tension of someone managing active danger to something slower and more complex, the beginning of the particular processing that happens when the thing you've been running toward for 20 years has finally arrived, and you're standing at the destination, trying to figure out what comes next. Adrian understood that feeling because he was having a version of it himself. He sat in the chair beside her bed. He didn't lead with news or procedure or the legal situation. He said, "How are you feeling?" She looked at him with slight surprise, as if the question was unexpected. "Better than yesterday," she said. "The doctor says I can probably be discharged in 2 or 3 days if there are no complications." "Good. What happened with Marco?" she asked. "The detail told me he's in custody, but nobody gave me details." Adrian walked her through the parking structure, the arrest, the processing. He told it the same way he told everything, factually in sequence without editorializing. He watched her face while he talked, the way she absorbed information with that focused, contained attention. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He didn't fight," she said. Not a question she was processing. "He argued. Then he stopped." Adrian thought about Marco's face in the parking structure. I think he'd known for a while that this was one of the possible endings. He'd planned for others, but he'd acknowledged this one. What did he say? At the end, Adrian considered whether to tell her and decided she had earned the full account. He repeated Marco's last words, the claim that the organization was real, that he hadn't enjoyed what he'd done. Elena's expression when he finished was not what he expected. Not anger. Something more complicated. He wanted to believe his own story, she said slowly. That's what that is. He did what he did, and he needed a version of it where he was still someone worth being. Someone who built something real, even if the means were wrong. You're more generous than I am, Adrian said. I'm not being generous, she said. I spent a long time thinking about what kind of person orders the death of a man like my father. And the answer I came to wasn't a monster. It was a man who decided his version of things was worth more than other people's lives. That's worse than a monster in some ways. Monsters don't choose. Adrian looked at her. You've thought about this a lot. 20 years, she said simply. He nodded. The case is going to be long, he said, returning to the practical. Park confirmed this morning that the prosecution intends to pursue full charges, the full scope of what's in those boxes. Marco's attorney will fight every piece of it. You'll need to testify. Multiple hearings, possibly over a period of years. I've said I'm ready for that. I know. I also want you to know. He paused, finding the right words. I've instructed my attorneys to make themselves available to you in an advisory capacity. For the testimony preparation, for understanding the legal process, not to shape what you say, the opposite, to make sure you're fully supported in saying exactly what's true. Elena looked at him for a moment. Why? Because your testimony is the spine of this case, he said. Not just legally, in terms of what it means. Joseph Conti left a recording in the dark, hoping someone would eventually hear it. His daughter carried that forward for 20 years. The least I can do is make sure she's not navigating the legal system alone. A long beat. You're different than I thought you'd be, she said. Different how? I built a picture of you over 8 months inside your house, she said. I watched you. I listened to how people talked about you. I read your correspondence when I could access it. I built the most accurate picture I could of who you were. She paused. And the picture I built was of a powerful man who had decided that what he controlled was more important than who he hurt to control it. That's not an unfair picture, Adrian said. No, she agreed. But it's also not complete. The man in that picture wouldn't have driven to New Jersey last night. The man in that picture didn't know what he'd been carrying, Adrian said. Ignorance is a kind of insulation. It allows you to make a certain kind of decision without feeling the full weight of it. He paused. I'm not insulated anymore. Elena looked at him with that steady reading quality. That's the hardest kind of change to make, she said. Not the dramatic decision, the arrest, going to the feds, all of that. Those are events. The hard change is the daily one. The decision you make every morning about what you're willing to see and what you're still going to choose not to. Is that what your father was like? Adrian said. Before he found the records, she thought about it. He was a careful, decent man who did his job and loved his family and didn't ask too many questions about where the work came from, she said. And then one day, the answers were in front of him and he couldn't put them away. He said once, my mother told me this afterward, that the hardest moment wasn't finding the records. It was the moment when he understood what they meant and had to decide whether to pretend he hadn't understood. He chose not to pretend, Adrian said. He chose not to pretend, she said, and it cost him everything. And you're still here, Adrian said, continuing what he started. Yes, she said. Then it didn't cost him everything, Adrian said. Not entirely. Something crossed Elena's face, a brief, complex movement of emotion that she controlled quickly and completely. Her eyes stayed dry, but the quality of the silence around her changed. No, she said after a moment. Not entirely. 3 days later, Adrian walked into the offices of his personal attorneys and spent 4 hours doing what he had told Park he would do, giving everything without limit, without the kind of strategic framing that lawyers by instinct try to construct. His lead attorney, a sharp-edged man named Hartwell, who had represented Adrian's interests for 11 years, grew visibly agitated over the course of the first hour. Adrian, Hartwell said, finally setting down his pen, I need to stop you. Why? Because what you're telling me is that you want to provide testimony that directly contradicts the most favorable legal construction of your position. Hartwell leaned forward. The power of attorney mechanism, the argument that Marco operated independently under that instrument, is the strongest ground we have. If you voluntarily testify to matters that undermine that argument, I'm not going to testify to things that aren't true to protect a legal construction, Adrian said. I'm not asking you to testify to things that aren't true. I'm asking you to be careful about how much ground you concede voluntarily. Hartwell's voice was controlled but urgent. Adrian, the Category 2 exposure, the ambiguous authorizations, if you testify openly about those without the framework of the power of attorney defense, you're looking at a materially worse outcome. Years worse, potentially. I understand that. Then why? Because the people who were hurt by those authorizations, regardless of how I interpreted what I was signing, those people are real, Adrian said. And the process that determines what I am accountable for needs to work from accurate information, not from the most favorable construction I can build. He looked at Hartwell steadily. I know this isn't how it's normally done. I'm not asking you to approve of it. I'm telling you how it's going to go. Hartwell looked at him for a long moment. He had the expression of a man who had represented powerful people for 30 years and was encountering something he didn't have a category for. You understand, Hartwell said carefully, that the outcome here, even with your cooperation, even with the framing that you were systematically deceived, could include significant incarceration. I understand that, and you're proceeding anyway. Yes, Adrian said. Can we continue? Hartwell picked up his pen. He made a note on his pad that Adrian couldn't read. Then he said without looking up, For the record, in 30 years of practice, I have never had a client sit in that chair and tell me they want to give less than the most favorable version of their story. Is that a problem? Adrian said. No, Hartwell said. It's just clarifying. He looked up. Continue. The call from Marco's attorney came on the 5th day. Adrian didn't take it. Initially, he let it go to voicemail and listened to the message twice before deciding how to respond. The attorney, a man named Garrison, whose voice carried the particular smooth authority of someone accustomed to making unfavorable situations sound inevitable, left a message saying that his client wished to communicate something directly and personally to Adrian Moretti, and that the communication was time-sensitive and relevant to the ongoing legal proceedings. Adrian called Kate's before he called Garrison back. "Marco wants to talk to me," he said. "Through his attorney," Kate said. "Through his attorney." A pause. "What's your read?" "Could be a legitimate message," Kate said. "Could be an attempt to assess where you are legally gather intelligence on the cooperation. Could be Marco trying to find a way to negotiate." A beat. "Could be he has something to offer that's worth hearing." "That last one is the interesting possibility," Adrian said. "It is," Kate agreed. "If he has additional information that hasn't surfaced in the documentation, names, locations, operations, that aren't in the boxes, that's prosecutorially valuable. And if I hear it and bring it to you, then it becomes part of the cooperation record," Kate said, "which benefits you." "I'm not doing it for the benefit," Adrian said. "I know," Kate said, "but it's still true." Adrian called Garrison back. The meeting happened 2 days later in a federal facility conference room, supervised, recorded with 2 of Kate's people present, and Hartwell sitting beside Adrian at the table. Marco came in looking like Marco. That was the unsettling thing. He was in a different suit. The facility allowed his attorney to bring him appropriate clothing for legal meetings, and he sat down across from Adrian with the same settled composure he had always had. The only difference was that the composure now had no infrastructure beneath it. He wasn't holding power. He was simply holding himself. "You look tired," Marco said, in an echo of the Monday morning meeting, the exact same words in the exact same tone. "You said that to me a week ago," Adrian said, "at the breakfast table." "You look less tired now, actually," Marco said. "Interesting. What did you want to tell me?" Marco looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "There are 3 operations that aren't in the boxes." The room was very still. Adrian kept his face neutral. "Tell me." "One is financial, a structure that was set up separately from the Meridian mechanism, using a different intermediary. About 11 million over 6 years. The relevant documentation is in a safety deposit box in Philadelphia. My attorney has the key." He paused. "The other 2 are operational." "Operational," Hartwell said carefully. 2 people who were eliminated." Marco said, using the word with the same flat professionalism with which he might have said 2 accounts that were closed. "The documentation of those authorizations doesn't exist in the boxes because I kept those specific records separately, for exactly this kind of situation." "Leverage," Adrian said. "Insurance," Marco said. "Same thing, different word." He looked at Adrian directly. "I'm telling you because those 2 people, their families, deserve to know what happened. And because I'm not going to spend the rest of my legal proceedings fighting over whether the boxes are authentic, when I could be cooperating on the parts that matter." "What do you want in exchange?" Adrian said. "Nothing from you," Marco said. "I've made a separate arrangement with the prosecution. This is..." He paused. He looked at the table for a moment, then back up. "This is me telling you directly. Because you sat across from me for 18 years, and I sat across from you. And some things should be said face to face." "Saying it doesn't undo it," Adrian said. "No," Marco said. "I know that. The families of those 2 people will be contacted through the proper channels," Marco said. "With full information. That's part of what I've arranged." He paused. "I'm not asking you to think better of me, Adrian. I know exactly what I am. I just..." He stopped. Something moved through his expression, not quite the exhaustion Adrian had seen in the parking structure, but related to it. The weight of something very heavy being set down. "I wanted there to be one conversation between us that was honest. We had 18 years of conversations," Adrian said. "Yes?" Marco said. "We did." A pause. "And this is the first honest one." The silence in the conference room was the particular kind that nobody fills. Finally, Adrian said, "The families will be contacted." "Yes?" "And the Philadelphia documentation." "My attorney will deliver it today." Adrian stood. He looked at Marco Bellini, at the silver-haired man who had built a hidden empire inside Adrian's visible one, who had ordered the death of a careful accountant and frightened his wife to death and set a 12-year-old girl adrift, who had sat at 1,000 tables with a warm voice and settled composure and done all of it without breaking that composure once. He looked at him and waited for something, anger or grief, or the particular desolating feeling of a man confronting the full scope of his own blindness. What he felt was quieter than any of those things. "Goodbye, Marco," he said. Marco looked up at him. "Goodbye, Adrian." Adrian walked out of the conference room and didn't look back. He called Elena from the car. She answered quickly. She was still in the facility in New Jersey, still recovering, but her voice on the phone had a quality that her voice in the hospital room hadn't had in the first days. Steadier. More like someone who was moving forward rather than managing immediate survival. "Marco gave us 3 more pieces," Adrian said. "2 of them are..." He paused. "2 of them are the deaths of people who weren't in the existing documentation." A silence. "Who?" she said. "I don't have names yet. Kate's will have them within the day." He paused. "I want to make sure you hear it from me before you hear it from somewhere else, because you may know the names. Given your father's involvement and the timeline, there may be people in the list who were connected to your family or your father's network." A long silence. "Tell me when you know," she said. "I will," he said. "Elena." He stopped. "What?" "Marco said he wanted one conversation between us that was honest, that all 18 years of our conversations were the other kind." He paused. "I keep thinking about how long he sat across from me and performed that honesty, and I keep thinking about how I never once questioned it." "You trusted him," she said. "Yes." "That's not a failure of character," she said. That's what trust is. It's an investment in a person based on the information you have. He manipulated the information. The failure is his, not yours." "But I chose not to look," Adrian said. "We talked about this. There's a difference between ignorance and chosen not looking." "Yes," she said. "But you're looking now, and you can't go back and look sooner. You can only determine what you do with what you see." He was quiet for a moment. "You keep doing that," he said. "Doing what?" "Taking the version of things that's hardest on me and finding the part of it that's still forward-facing," he said. "You don't let me sink into it, but you also don't tell me it didn't happen." A pause. "My father was the same way," she said. "He used to say that guilt was only useful for about 5 minutes. After that it became self-indulgence." Adrian almost smiled. "He sounds like someone I would have liked. He was someone you should have known," she said. And then after a beat, with the particular care of someone choosing their words precisely, "He would have liked you. The version of you that exists right now. He was always more interested in what someone chose to become than in what they'd already been." The car moved through the city. Outside Manhattan continued in its relentless way, noise and movement, and the layered, ordinary life of 8 million people who had no knowledge of and no stake in the particular story that had just been told and was still being told inside the legal machinery of the federal system. "I have to go," Adrian said. "Hartwell has me in 2 more meetings this afternoon." "I know," Elena said. "Adrian, one more thing." "What?" "When this settles enough, when we're both on the other side of the immediate legal situation, I want to talk about the families," she said. "The people who were hurt, not in a legal context, not for the case. I want to do something real for them, something that isn't just testimony and documentation and legal outcomes." "What do you have in mind?" "I don't know yet," she said. "That's why I need to talk about it, with someone who understands the scope of it." He thought about what Vincent had asked him to build, the list of men who were genuinely clean. The list of people left adrift by the collapse of a structure they'd served without knowing what it was built on. "I'll add it to the conversation," he said, "when we're on the other side." "Good," she said. "Go to your meetings." He almost smiled again. "You sound like you're managing me." "I spent 11 months watching how you respond to direct instruction," she said. "I know it works." He did smile then. It was brief and it was real, and it was the first one in a week. "Goodbye, Elena," he said. Goodbye, she said. The first real collapse came 3 weeks later. Not a legal collapse, the legal proceedings were moving in the direction Park had projected steadily, and with the particular grinding momentum of a federal prosecution that had exceptional documentation and multiple cooperating witnesses. The first real collapse was the organization itself. It had been inevitable. Adrian had known it was inevitable. But knowing a thing and living through it were, as he was discovering in multiple contexts, substantially different experiences. The men who ran the organization's day-to-day financial operations had begun the process of legal separation within the first week, advised by their own attorneys, disconnecting themselves from entities that were now under federal examination. 3 of the 6 senior men who reported directly to Adrian had retained counsel and entered into various stages of cooperation negotiations. 2 had gone silent and were represented only by their attorneys, who communicated that their clients would not be providing voluntary testimony. 1, a man named Corso, who had worked in the organization for 14 years and who had been in Adrian's internal assessment among the cleanest of the senior tier, called Adrian directly. "I need to know something," Corso said. He was not a man who usually called Adrian directly about anything personal. They had a professional relationship built on mutual respect and clear operational roles, not the kind of relationship that produced personal calls. "Ask," Adrian said. "What I did, what we all did in the parts of the operation that weren't Marco's," Corso said. "The parts that were just the organization as it existed on the surface. Are those parts, are we going to be caught in the same net?" It was the question a lot of people were asking in the orbit of the case. And it was the question that didn't have a clean answer, which was the thing that made it both fair and devastating. "Your attorney can give you a cleaner assessment than I can," Adrian said. "But the honest answer is, it depends on what you knew and what you can demonstrate you didn't know. And it depends on what cooperation looks like from where you're standing." "I didn't know about Marco," Corso said. "I need you to believe that." "I believe it," Adrian said. And he did. Corso was exactly the kind of man who would have served the organization at the level he saw, without understanding what was happening in the level he didn't see. Adrian had counted on men like Corso for exactly that reason he had. He now understood, built a structure that was good at keeping people exactly as informed as they needed to be and no more. "I have a family," Corso said. The words came out with the particular plainness of a man stating the most important fact in his universe. "I know," Adrian said. "I need this to not destroy them." "Talk to your attorney," Adrian said. "Cooperate fully. Tell the truth about what you knew and what you didn't. The documentation from the boxes is clear about the line between Marco's operation and the surface organization. The prosecution is focused on Marco's network, not on men who operated in good faith." A long pause. "Did you know?" Corso said. "Honestly, no," Adrian said. "Not in the way you mean. I knew the organization operated in ways that I allowed myself not to examine. That's a different kind of not knowing. But about Marco specifically, about what he was doing in the structures underneath, no." Another pause. "Okay," Corso said. "Okay." He sounded like a man who needed to hear that specific answer from that specific person, and who had decided to accept it because the alternative was a weight he couldn't carry in the direction of forward. "Take care of your family, Corso," Adrian said. "You too," Corso said, and then stopped, as if he'd just heard himself say something that didn't quite apply anymore. "I know," Adrian said. "Go." The call from Park came on a Thursday afternoon 4 weeks after the arrest. "We've filed formal charges," she said. "The indictment covers 31 counts across 17 years of documented activity. The 3 additional items from Marco's voluntary disclosure added 4 counts." A pause. "It's comprehensive." "What's the timeline on the proceedings?" Adrian said. "Given the scope, we're looking at a trial date somewhere between 14 and 18 months out," Park said. Marco's attorney will push for continuances. It's standard strategy on cases with this much documentation. Our job is to keep it moving." She paused. "Your formal cooperation interview is scheduled for next Tuesday. We'll be there for most of the day." "I'll be there," Adrian said. "One more thing," Park said. "Elena Conti." Her voice shifted slightly. "Her attorney has formally entered a victim impact statement process. Given her unique position both as the person who uncovered the evidence and as the daughter of a victim, the U.S. Attorney's Office is treating her participation as foundational to the proceedings." "That's right," Adrian said. "It should be." "I want to tell you something off the record," Park said. Her tone changed in a way that was subtle but distinct professional formality, dropping slightly a human voice emerging from the procedural one. "In the 14 years I've been in this office, I have never had a cooperation of this kind begin the way this one began. With a note in a dying woman's hand. With a man who chose to go to a federal building rather than contain the situation." She paused. "I don't say that to credit you with something you don't deserve credit for. But I want you to know it's not unnoticed." "Noted," Adrian said. "See you Tuesday," Park said and hung up. Adrian set the phone down. He was in a borrowed apartment on the Upper East Side, one of the properties not directly connected to the organization's holdings, which Hartwell had identified as a place he could be for the duration of the legal proceedings. It was clean, quiet, anonymous, in the way that rented spaces are anonymous, and it contained nothing of his previous life except his clothes, his phone, and the metal case which he had brought from the hospital and had not yet decided what to do with. He picked up the metal case. He opened it. He took out the recording device. He pressed play. Joseph Conti's voice filled the borrowed apartment's steady, meticulous, carrying 20 years of waiting in it. "Adrian, if you are hearing this, it means you finally discovered the truth." He listened to all 41 minutes again. Not for information. He had the information. He listened because he needed to hear the voice of a man who had made a choice at terrible cost and had trusted without any certainty that the choice would eventually mean something. When it ended, he sat for a long time in the quiet. Then he picked up his phone and sent Elena a message. It said, "I listened to your father's recording again today. He trusted the right things would happen if someone honest found it. I want you to know he was right." She replied 3 minutes later. "I know," she wrote. "He usually was." And then, after a brief pause, a second message. "Thank you for telling me." Adrian set the phone down. Outside the window, the city moved in its enormous, indifferent way. Somewhere downtown, a case file was being built that would determine the next several years of his life. Somewhere in New Jersey, a woman who had spent 20 years carrying her father's unfinished work was finally for the first time standing on the other side of it. And somewhere in a federal facility, Marco Bellini was sitting with the particular stillness of a man who had confirmed his ending and was waiting for it to arrive. Adrian thought about all three of those things. Then he thought about what Elena had said, that the hard change was not the dramatic decision, but the daily one. The one you made every morning about what you were willing to see. He reached for his phone again and called Vincent. "The list?" he said when Vincent picked up. "The men who were clean. How far along are you?" 17 names so far, Vincent said. "Maybe 8 more I'm still assessing." "Keep going," Adrian said. "I want it complete before the cooperation interview next week. There are people who served this organization in good faith, and I'm not going to let them disappear into the fallout without someone accounting for what they're owed." "Understood," Vincent said. "Adrian, for what it's worth." A pause. "I think you're doing the right thing." "I know," Adrian said. "I'm still not sure that's enough, but I know that much." "It's a start," Vincent said. "Yes," Adrian said. "It is." The cooperation interview lasted 11 hours. Adrian arrived at the federal building on Church Street at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, with Hartwell beside him and a legal pad he never used because there was nothing he needed to write down. Everything he was going to say was already organized in his memory, with the same methodical precision he had applied to every significant thing in his professional life. Park was there with 2 additional attorneys from the U.S. Attorney's Office, a court recorder, and Cates sitting in the back of the room with his hands folded and his expression neutral. They began with the financial structures. They moved through the operational history. They covered the power of attorney, the holding entities, the decisions Adrian had made, and the decisions he had believed he was making, and the gap between those two things. Hartwell interjected twice with clarifying legal framing, and both times Adrian gently overrode him and answered the question as asked rather than as framed. At the 4th hour, Park asked him directly about 3 specific incidents from the Category 2, exposure, the ambiguous authorizations, the ones Hartwell had warned him about, the ones that lived in the space where his legal defense was weakest. Hartwell put a hand on Adrian's forearm. Adrian looked at him. "I'm going to answer," he said quietly. "Adrian." "I'm going to answer," he said again, and Hartwell took his hand back. He answered all 3, fully, without the construction that would have shielded him. He answered because the people connected to those decisions deserved a record that told the truth about what happened to them, and a record that protected the man who made the decisions was not a record that told the truth. When he finished the 3rd answer, the room was quiet for a moment. Park looked at him across the table. She didn't say anything about it. She made a note and moved to the next item, but Cates in the back of the room shifted in his chair in a way that Adrian noticed and understood as the acknowledgement of a man who had seen a difficult thing done correctly. They broke for 30 minutes at 2 p.m. Adrian drank coffee and stood at the window looking at the city and said nothing to Hartwell, who had the careful expression of an attorney who was intellectually opposed to his client's approach and professionally obligated to continue representing it. "You know what this does to your sentencing exposure," Hartwell said finally. "Yes," Adrian said. "The cooperation credit helps. But what you gave them in those 3 answers—" "I know what I gave them," Adrian said. "I know what it costs. Can we continue?" Hartwell looked at him for a long moment. Then he said something he had never said to a client in 30 years because it was not professionally calibrated or legally useful. "I think you're a better man than most of what you've spent your life doing," Hartwell said. "I want you to know I think that." Adrian turned from the window. "Thank you," he said. "It doesn't change anything." "No," Hartwell agreed. "But it's still true." They went back in. The sentencing recommendation came 14 months later, 3 months after Marco Bellini's trial concluded. The trial itself had been the kind of proceedings that court reporters write books about: 31 counts, 17 years of documented activity. A recording from a dead accountant that was played in open court and produced a silence in the courtroom so complete that the sound of the air conditioning became audible. Gerald Watts testified for 2 days and was methodical and precise and visibly frightened throughout, and his fear read as authentic because it was. Elena testified for 3 days. Adrian watched Elena's testimony from a gallery seat on the 2nd day, the day she addressed the impact on her family directly, the day she spoke about her father and her mother and the foster care years, and the 20 years of carrying something she hadn't been able to set down until now. She was extraordinary. Not in the dramatic sense she didn't perform. She was simply completely honest and completely present in a way that made every word she said land with the specific gravity of truth, rather than the constructed weight of argument. She spoke about her father the way you speak about someone you have carried inside you for so long that they have become part of your structure, part of the material you're made of, and she spoke about the impact on her childhood and her adulthood, and her capacity to build a normal life with the same factual steadiness her father had used in his recording. At one point, the defense attorney tried to suggest that her investigation had been motivated by financial gain or personal vendetta rather than genuine pursuit of justice. Elena looked at him with the particular quality of a woman who has spent 20 years preparing for exactly this question. "My father made $47,000 a year," she said. "He took a job at Meridian Consulting because it paid better than his previous position, and he needed to save for my college fund. He found something he wasn't supposed to find. He tried to do the right thing, and it killed him." She paused. You're asking me whether my motivation for spending 20 years and every resource I had pursuing this case was financial. My mother died at 41 years old. I spent 4 years in foster care. I changed my name to protect myself from the people who had already taken my parents. What exactly do you think I was hoping to gain financially? The defense attorney moved on. Marco was convicted on 28 of 31 counts. The 3 acquittals were on charges where the documentation was oldest and the authentication challenges had succeeded. Park had expected this and had built the case accordingly. The 28 convictions covered the central criminal activity comprehensively. The sentencing hearing was 3 weeks after the verdict. Marco Bellini received 34 years. He stood when the sentence was read, and he was the same Marco. He had always been composed, silver-haired, standing straight in the particular posture of a man who had decided long ago that whatever came, he would meet it on his feet. He looked at the judge without expression. He did not look at the gallery where Adrian was sitting, but as they moved to take him from the courtroom, he paused just for a second, just long enough, and looked directly at Elena, who was sitting 3 rows ahead of Adrian. It was not an apology. Marco Bellini was not a man who apologized. It was something else, the acknowledgement of a man who had underestimated someone, and was in his way acknowledging the miscalculation. A form of respect from a man whose respect meant something terrible about its source. Elena held his gaze without flinching until they took him through the door. Then she turned and found Adrian's face in the gallery behind her. He gave her a single nod. She turned back around, and he watched her shoulders drop just slightly, just for one moment, with the physical release of something carried for 20 years finally being set down. Adrian's sentencing came 6 weeks later. The federal judge was a woman named Calloway, who had the reputation of being precise and unsentimental. She followed the guidelines, weighted the factors carefully, and did not allow the courtroom to become a theater for either sympathy or severity. Adrian had read everything he could find about her sentencing history in comparable cases, and what he'd found was consistent. She was fair in the specific way that fairness required courage, which meant she didn't always land where either side expected. Park had submitted a comprehensive cooperation letter that outlined the scope and quality of Adrian's assistance, the voluntary disclosure, the documentation, the 11-hour interview, the testimony in Marco's trial, where Adrian had spent 2 days on the stand, answering every question with the same complete honesty he had brought to every other piece of this process. She had noted specifically the Category 2 admissions that Adrian had made voluntarily and without legal necessity. The defense submitted what Hartwell had constructed the best available framework of the systematic deception, the power of attorney mechanism, the ways in which Adrian had been used as a shield while scrupulously reflecting Adrian's instruction that the submission not contradict what the evidence showed. Hartwell had told him privately that in 30 years he had never submitted a defense brief with this particular quality, honest about what his client had done, honest about what his client hadn't known, and honest about the fact that the line between those two things was not always clean. "It's the most accurate brief I've ever written," Hartwell had said. "I'm not sure it's the most effective one." "It's the right one," Adrian said. "Yes," Hartwell said. "It is." Judge Calloway read the sentencing recommendation, the cooperation letter, the defense submission, and the victim impact statements, all 19 of them from people across the scope of the case, whose lives had been touched by the organization's activity, before she looked up at the courtroom. She looked at Adrian. "Mr. Moretti," she said. "Stand, please." He stood. "I have presided over federal organized crime sentencings for 11 years, Judge Calloway said. In that time, I have sentenced men who built organizations of comparable scale and complexity to the one before this court. I have read cooperation letters from prosecutors describing defendants who assisted the government's case. I have read defense submissions outlining the mitigating factors of systematic deception and the ways in which powerful men can be used without knowing it." She paused. "What I have not read in 11 years is a cooperation record of the character reflected in these documents." The courtroom was very quiet. The government's letter notes that you volunteered information in your cooperation interview that materially damaged your own legal position, information that your attorney did not recommend disclosing, and that you chose to disclose because, and I am quoting the letter directly, the defendant stated that accuracy in the record was more important than its legal convenience. She looked at him. That is an unusual statement from anyone in your position, Mr. Moretti, and the record of your cooperation supports that it was not performance. It was a consistent pattern across 14 months of engagement with this office. She looked at the papers in front of her for a moment. The law requires me to account for the scope of the criminal activity that occurred under your authority, both the activity you directed and the activity you failed to prevent, through a willful pattern of not seeking information you should have sought. The law also requires me to account for the nature and extent of your cooperation with the government's investigation, and for your conduct following your awareness of the criminal activity. She paused. Those two accountings do not resolve to a simple number. They require judgment. Adrian did not move. He did not look at anything except Judge Calloway's face. Taking into account all factors before this court, she said, I sentence you to 7 years in federal custody with credit for the 14 months of cooperation period already served under the terms of your agreement with the government. I further sentence you to 5 years of supervised release following your term of custody and to restitution in an amount to be determined through the victim assessment process currently underway. 7 years, with 14 months already credited. Hartwell exhaled beside him, very quietly, with the particular quality of a man who had prepared for worse and was confronting the specific relief of having prepared correctly. Adrian did not exhale. He stood, and he absorbed the number, and he held it the way you hold something that is going to shape the next chapter of your life. Not with resistance, not with gratitude exactly, but with the clear-eyed acknowledgement of a man who had made his choices and was now receiving their consequence. Thank you, Your Honor, he said. Judge Calloway looked at him for a moment that was brief but not routine. Mr. Moretti, she said, the court hopes that the choices you made in this process reflect the direction of the rest of your life rather than the exception to it. So do I, Adrian said. That's my intention. She nodded once, and the gavel came down. Elena was waiting outside the courtroom. She had been present for the sentencing. She had the right as a victim's family member and cooperating witness to attend, but she had been in the gallery rather than at the front of the room, and he hadn't seen her face during the proceedings. He saw her now standing in the corridor outside the courtroom doors, Luis Ferraro a few feet behind her as he had been behind her at almost every significant moment of the past 14 months. She looked at him when he came through the doors, and he looked at her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. 7 years, she said. 7 years, he confirmed. She nodded slowly. He could see her processing the number, weighing it against some internal calibration that he couldn't fully read. Is that what you expected? She said. Less than Hartwell's worst case, Adrian said. More than Hartwell's best case. He paused. About right, I think. She looked at him for a moment. About right, she repeated. Not agreeing, not disagreeing, acknowledging. How are you? He said. I watched Marco get convicted on 28 counts, she said. I gave 3 days of testimony, and I didn't break, and I didn't collapse, and I said every true thing I needed to say. She paused. I'm the best I've been in 20 years. I know, he said. I watched you testify. Something moved in her expression. I didn't know you were there. I was there, he said. 3rd row from the back, 2nd day. He paused. You were remarkable. She looked at him with that direct assessing quality that he had come to know as simply how she engaged with things that mattered. My father would have been... She stopped, started again. He would have been proud, I think. He would have been proud of the outcome, and he would have been very concerned about the method. She almost smiled. He would have told me I should have gone to the authorities directly instead of going undercover into a mafia household. He would have been right, Adrian said. Probably, she agreed, but it wouldn't have worked. No, Adrian said. It wouldn't have. He paused. Elena, I want to talk to you about the foundation. In the months since Marco's arrest, Adrian had been working through Hartwell and through a separate team of attorneys handling his non-criminal legal matters on the disposition of his remaining assets. The organization's criminal holdings were subject to forfeiture. His personal assets were partially entangled with the organization's structure and were being carefully separated through the restitution and forfeiture process. What remained, and there was less than people assumed, because Adrian had always lived relative to his means, rather than extravagantly relative to his income, he had been deciding what to do with. The answer had come to him slowly, over the course of many conversations with Elena, and with Vincent, and with the 19 people who had submitted victim impact statements, and with the people on Vincent's list of clean men who had served the organization without knowing what they were serving. I've finalized the structure, he said. I want to use the remaining liquid assets, what survives the restitution process, to establish a foundation. Victim services specifically for people caught in the financial fallout of organized crime activity who don't qualify for traditional victim assistance programs because their connection to the activity was indirect. He paused. People like the families of the men on Conti's list. People who were financially destroyed by the collapse of structures they depended on without understanding what those structures were built on. Elena was very still. You've been working on this, she said. For 8 months, he said. Hartwell and a separate team have been building the legal framework. It'll require court approval as part of the restitution arrangement, but Park has indicated the U.S. Attorney's Office won't oppose it. He paused. I want it to carry your father's name. The silence in the corridor was complete. The Joseph Conti Foundation, she said, very quietly. If you agree to it, he said. It's your family's name. The decision is yours. She looked at him for a long moment, a look that was different from any of the others he had received from her across 14 months of one of the most intense, shared experiences of both their lives. It was not the assessing look, not the analytical look, not the watchful look. It was something more open than any of those. Yes, she said. I agree to it. Luis, standing a few feet behind Elena, said nothing. But he turned his face slightly away in the particular manner of a man giving space to a moment that belongs to other people. There's one more thing, Adrian said. I want you to run it. Elena blinked. I'm going to be unavailable for the next several years, he said simply. The foundation needs someone who understands the scope of what it's trying to do and has the credibility to represent it to the people it's meant to serve. That's you. Unambiguously. I'm not... She started. You spent 20 years building an operation on no resources and no institutional support, and you nearly got it done single-handedly, Adrian said. You're exactly the right person. I'm a victim, she said. I'm not an administrator or an executive. You're the daughter of a man who was murdered for trying to do the right thing, Adrian said, and you finished what he started. In my experience, that's a more relevant qualification than any title. She looked at him. You're doing that thing again, she said. What thing? Where you frame something in a way that makes it very difficult to argue with. I learned it from watching you testify, he said. She almost laughed. It was close enough to a laugh that it changed the quality of the corridor, made it briefly human, in the way that moments of genuine lightness make institutional spaces briefly human. Then she said, I'll do it. Good, he said. Hartwell has the documents ready when you are. He surrendered to federal custody 17 days later. Hartwell had negotiated the facility assignment, a federal correctional institution in Pennsylvania, with appropriate security classification, and more relevantly adequate access for legal visits, and the kind of ongoing communication that the Foundation's early operational period was going to require. Adrian had spent the 17 days doing 3 things: visiting the 19 people who had submitted victim impact statements, finalizing the Foundation's legal structure, and saying goodbye to the men from Vincent's list, in a series of conversations that were mostly about the practical, what came next for them, what resources were available, what the collapse of the organization meant for their immediate circumstances. He visited Vincent last. They sat in a coffee shop in Midtown and drank bad coffee for 2 hours, and Adrian listened to Vincent really listened, the way he hadn't always listened across 20 years of organizational briefings, talk about what he was going to do next. Vincent had cooperated with the government's investigation and had received a favorable resolution of his own exposure on the basis of that cooperation and his demonstrated ignorance of Marco's activities. He was 53 and had spent his entire adult life working in security for an organization that no longer existed. "What do you actually want to do?" Adrian asked. "That's a strange question at 53, Vincent said. "It's the only relevant one," Adrian said. Vincent was quiet for a moment with the thoughtful quality of a man who had not been asked this question often enough to have a quick answer. "There are people in situations like the men on that list," he said slowly. "People who served organizations they didn't fully understand and got left behind when those organizations collapsed. And there are people who are going to serve those organizations, young working class without options, who could go a different direction if someone helped them go a different direction early." He paused. "I know that world. I know how it pulls people in and how it holds them." He looked at Adrian. "I think I'd like to work on pulling them out instead." Adrian looked at him. "Call Elena Conti," he said. "The foundation is going to need someone who understands the operational side of what the organization was, who can speak credibly to the people it's trying to reach." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "You're staffing the foundation from a coffee shop 2 weeks before you surrender to federal custody." "I have 17 days, Adrian said. "I'm using them." Vincent shook his head slowly. "You haven't changed that much," he said. But he said it with the particular warmth of a man who meant it as a compliment. "No," Adrian agreed. But the direction changed. They finished their bad coffee. They stood outside the coffee shop on a midtown street while the city moved around them in its enormous way, and Vincent put out his hand, and Adrian shook it and held it for a moment longer than a handshake usually lasts. "Thank you," Adrian said, "for every year. For following me into this, even when you didn't know where it was going." "That's the job," Vincent said. "It was more than the job," Adrian said. "And you know it." Vincent nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "I know it." They went separate directions on the sidewalk, and Adrian didn't look back. Elena came to the surrender. He hadn't asked her to come. He hadn't expected her to. The surrender was a federal procedural event, not a personal one, and their relationship across the past 14 months had been built on practical collaboration and honest conversation, rather than the kind of personal closeness that generates its own ceremonial moments. He was standing outside the facility at 8 a.m. with Hartwell and the required documentation when he saw her car pull into the adjacent lot. She got out alone. Luis wasn't with her. She crossed the lot and stopped a few feet from where he was standing. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I know," she said. They looked at each other for a moment in the early morning light. "I wanted to tell you something before you went in," she said. "In person, not by phone." "Tell me," he said. "When I came into your house 11 months before everything happened," she said, "I was carrying something very specific, a specific idea of what justice looked like. It looked like exposure, the documentation, the case, the conviction. Marco in a courtroom receiving the consequence of what he did." She paused. "That's what I built 20 years toward, and it happened. It happened exactly as I needed it to." "But," he said. "But what I didn't build toward," she said, "and what I didn't expect was that the most significant thing to come out of this wasn't the conviction." She paused. "It was watching you choose differently than everything you'd been told to choose. Every pressure in your world was toward containment, toward protection of the structure, toward the option that kept you powerful and safe. And you chose the other thing." She looked at him steadily. "My father wrote in his letter that he hoped you were the kind of man who would do something with what you found. I want you to know you were. You are." Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Your father trusted the right things would find each other, he said. Yes, she said. He did. He was right about me because of you, Adrian said. I want you to understand that clearly. The note, the room, the recording without you, none of it surfaces. Without you carrying it for 20 years and having the courage to go all the way into the risk of it, it stays buried. Forever. He paused. The organization might have run for another decade. The families might never have known. I might have gone the rest of my life being exactly what Marco needed me to be. He looked at her. You changed that, not me. We changed it, she said. He thought about that, about the particular quality of things that require more than one person and cannot be attributed cleanly to either one. Yes, he said. We changed it. She reached into her coat pocket and took out a small envelope. She held it out to him. He took it. What is this? Open it when you're inside, she said. Not before. He looked at the envelope. Then he put it in his breast pocket. The foundation, he said. I'll want reports. You'll get them, she said. Monthly. I've already decided the format. I'd expect nothing less, he said. She looked at him one more time with that direct, clear quality that had been there from the first moment she was awake enough to look at him in the hospital, in the borrowed room, in the corridor outside the courtroom. The look of a woman who had learned to see clearly because her survival had required it, and who had never stopped using the skill, even when survival was no longer the immediate question. Be careful in there, she said. You're more useful out here. I know, he said. I'll remember that. She nodded. She turned and walked back to her car. She didn't look back either, which was something they had in common. Hartwell touched his arm. It's time, he said quietly. Adrian turned toward the entrance. But he opened the envelope that night. It was a small card, cream-colored, with nothing printed on it. In Elena's handwriting, he recognized it now from the note on the marble floor that had started everything 2 lines. The first line was a date, 22 years ago. He looked at it and understood immediately it was the date Joseph Conti had disappeared. The second line was 4 words. He didn't die forgotten. Adrian sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the facility room with the card in his hand and the weight of 22 years and 14 months and 11 hours and 41 minutes of recording, and all the names on Vincent's list, and the 19 victim impact statements, and the faces of men he had known and men he had wronged, and a 12-year-old girl growing up without her father, and the woman that girl had become quiet and relentless, and absolutely clear about what she was doing and why. He sat with all of it, and for the first time since he had crouched on the marble floor of the East Wing corridor and found a note in a dying woman's hand. He let himself feel the full weight of what had changed and what could not be changed, and what was despite everything still possible. He held the card for a long time. Then he set it on the small shelf beside the bed where he could see it. He lay back. He closed his eyes, and somewhere outside the facility, the city was already moving into its ordinary Thursday, 8 million people going about the business of their lives, largely unaware of and mostly indifferent to the specific story that had just reached its necessary end inside a Pennsylvania federal facility on an early autumn morning. But the story had reached it. Joseph Conti's recording had been heard. His daughter had finished what he started. The men who had built an empire on a stolen name had been brought to the place where names run out and only actions remain. And a man who had spent 20 years being the most powerful figure in a room full of dangerous people had chosen, when it finally mattered, to be something more difficult and more rare than powerful. He had chosen to be honest. He had chosen accountability over empire, truth over protection, and the harder path over the easier one at every decision point where those things diverged, and they had diverged at every decision point there was. That was not redemption. Redemption was too clean a word for what this was. The people who had been hurt were still hurt. The years that had been taken could not be given back. Joseph Conti did not come back to life because the truth was finally told about how he died, but his daughter knew what happened to him, and the people who made it happen were standing in the full consequence of that. And the man who had unknowingly carried their crimes on his name had spent 14 months doing everything in his power to make sure that the record was accurate, and the outcome was just at the cost of everything he had built and a significant portion of the years he had left. That was not redemption. That was something more real than redemption. That was a person finally choosing who they were going to be, not when it was easy, not when the choice was between good and better, but when it was hardest, when everything pointed the other way, when the cost was everything, and the reward was only the ability to look at the truth without flinching. That was the choice that mattered. That was the only choice that ever did. And in a facility in Pennsylvania, in a narrow room with a small shelf and a cream-colored card in handwriting he would have recognized anywhere. Adrian Moretti closed his eyes and knew for the first time in 20 years exactly who he was. Not a mafia boss, not a shield, not the face on an empire someone else had built. A man who had finally, at enormous cost, and not a moment too soon, decided that the truth was worth more than everything he'd spent his life accumulating. And that was enough. That had to be enough. And for the first time in a very long time it was.